My name is Stella Susan, and I am 29 years old. 3 weeks ago, I found myself standing on an ice-cold glass balcony overlooking the snow-capped mountains of Aspen. Police sirens echoed through the freezing night air, cutting through the faint music of the winter solstice gala inside. At my feet, wearing a sequined designer gown she paid for with a maxed-out credit line, was my mother. She was on her knees. Her mascara was smeared, and she was clawing at the hem of my dress, sobbing heavily. "Please, Stella," she wept, her voice cracking in front of half the town's elite. "We are your family. You have to fix this." I did not step back. I did not reach out to comfort her. I just took a slow sip of my vintage champagne, let the crisp finish settle, and looked down at the woman who had spent my entire adult life treating me like a personal ATM. "I gave you 72 hours, I told her. My voice was calm, carrying no anger, just the icy reality she refused to accept. You see, my parents are the poster children for Aspen's toxic, rugged luxury culture. They are obsessed with private ski clubs, designer winter gear, and projecting an image of effortless wealth. But their entire empire is a house of cards built on predatory loans. They worship my younger sister Charlotte, a shallow social climber who constantly mocks my quiet corporate career. They think I just do unglamorous office labor. They think I am a glorified customer service rep. What none of them realized is that I am an elite global itinerary architect. I design multi-million-dollar travel experiences for ultra-high net worth individuals. I command a network of private jets, island buyouts, and exclusive concierge services. I hold immense professional power in the very luxury circles they are so desperate to impress. So when they arrogantly backed me into a corner and ordered me to fund Charlotte's $85,000 honeymoon to Bora Bora, threatening to disown me if I refused, they thought I would cave. They thought I would open my wallet like I always did to save their precious social standing. They had no idea they were forcing my hand to trigger a financial avalanche that would bury them all. Before I tell you exactly what happened when I walked out of their chalet that night and made the phone call that ended their fake lives, please take a moment to like and subscribe to Morning Revenge. But only if this story speaks to you. Drop your age and where you are listening from in the comments. Here is how 3 days changed my life forever. It started on a Tuesday evening inside my parents' rented luxury chalet. The heat in the living room felt suffocating. A grand gas-powered fireplace dominated the far wall. The ceramic logs burned with a synthetic perfection that provided heat without any messy ash. It was a perfect symbol for my family, an expensive and carefully controlled fake. I sat on the edge of a leather sofa, exhausted. I had spent the past 14 hours finalizing a private yacht tour across the Mediterranean for a tech mogul. My brain was fried from calculating currency exchanges and offshore logistics. My mother sat across from me, wrapped in a cashmere shawl she definitely could not afford. Without saying a word, she slid a heavy, glossy brochure across the mahogany coffee table. It stopped right in front of my hands. "Bora Bora," my mother said. She tapped a perfectly manicured fingernail against the cover, which featured a sprawling overwater bungalow surrounded by turquoise water. "Charlotte's wedding is in 3 months. She deserves the finest French Polynesia honeymoon, Stella. You are paying for it. And we want you booking it under your agency's elite tier, so she gets the VIP treatment." I looked over at Charlotte. My 25-year-old sister was sprawled out on a velvet chaise lounge. She did not even bother to look up from her phone. "Make sure Preston gets the private helicopter transfer from the airport," Charlotte muttered, scrolling lazily. "Do not book the shared boat, Stella. It is so tacky. Preston's family would judge us." Preston was her fiancé, a man whose entire personality was wrapped up in trust funds and superficial appearances. I picked up the brochure. I did not need to read the fine print to know the cost. The projected total was printed right on the bottom corner. $85,000. I set the brochure back down and aligned it with the edge of the table. "I can secure a vendor discount for you," I said, keeping my tone professional, "but I need the deposit transferred from Dad's account by Thursday morning to hold the reservation." My father let out a short, dismissive laugh from his armchair. He took a sip of a vintage bourbon he had bought on credit. Do not be difficult, Stella. You know our liquidity is tied up in the country club renewals right now. Just run it through your corporate account. You expense these things all the time. I stared at him. I expense client trips, Dad. Clients who pay the firm back. I am a travel architect, not your personal bank. I am not paying for a vacation that costs as much as a house down payment. My mother's expression hardened. The polite high society mask slipped right off her face, revealing the calculating greed beneath. You will book this trip, Stella. You will pay for it. If you refuse to support your own sister for her wedding, if you embarrass us in front of Preston's family, you are no longer part of this family. The room went dead silent. The only sound was the artificial hiss of the gas fire. The ultimatum hung in the air. This was their favorite tactic. They had used it to drain my savings since I was 18 years old. Pay up or be cast out. I looked at the three people who had used me as a financial shield for years. I felt a cold detachment settle deep in my chest. I stood up and slung my coat over my arm. No, I said. My mother's jaw dropped. Excuse me? I said no. I turned and walked toward the entryway. Wait right there, my mother snapped. She stood up so fast she nearly knocked over her wine glass. If you are going to turn your back on us, give me the spare safety deposit box key, the one with the family insurance documents. You have no right to hold on to it if you are not going to be part of this family. I paused at the door. I did not care about the safety deposit box. My mother and I had co-signed it years ago for emergencies. I reached into my purse, pulled out the small brass key, and tossed it onto the mahogany table. It landed next to the Bora Bora brochure with a sharp clatter. I walked out into the freezing night. I had no idea that by handing over that key, I had just given Charlotte the exact tool she needed to commit federal wire fraud. I drove my paid-off SUV down the winding mountain roads of Aspen. The heater blasted against my frozen fingers, but the chill settling in my bones had nothing to do with the winter weather. The adrenaline from walking out on my family was starting to fade, leaving behind a bitter, familiar sting in my throat. Through the windshield, the ski town below glittered like a diamond necklace dropped carelessly in the snow. Aspen is not just a vacation destination. It is a gladiator arena. In this specific area, wealth is a weapon, and my family was fighting a war they had already lost. As the tires navigated the treacherous black ice, my mind drifted back 11 years. I was 18 years old, sitting at our kitchen table with an acceptance letter to a solid university and a financial aid packet that covered almost nothing. My father sat across from me, gleefully signing the lease papers for a brand new autobiography edition Range Rover. He did not even look at me when he pushed a stack of high-interest private student loan applications across the table. We need the liquid cash for the country club dues, Stella, he had said, tracing the custom leather interior options on his glossy brochure. A man is measured by what he drives up the mountain. You are smart. You can handle the debt. So I signed. I shackled myself to a decade of crushing monthly payments so my father could toss his heavy keys to the valet and feel superior to his neighbors. That was the day I learned my exact value in their eyes. I was not a daughter. I was collateral. I spent my 20s eating ramen in a tiny studio apartment, working 60-hour weeks to clear that debt, while they drank imported wine on a revolving line of credit. I paid off the last loan 2 years ago. I did not celebrate with them. I did not tell them. I simply stopped telling them anything about my finances, building a fortress around my career that they could not breach. To survive in the upper echelons of Colorado society, you have to play the game of rugged luxury flawlessly. It is a toxic environment where prominent families obsess over holding exclusive private ski club memberships. They wear designer winter gear that costs more than a modest vehicle, and they prove their worth by hosting lavish mountainside galas. You are expected to pretend the money flows like a river. My parents were drowning in predatory debt just to keep their heads above that rushing water. They lived on astronomical interest rates, constantly shifting balances from one hidden bank account to another, terrified someone might discover the truth. Right in the center of their delusional kingdom was Charlotte. My younger sister had never worked a day in her life, yet she carried herself like royalty. She spent her days cultivating a shallow social media presence, posting carefully filtered photos from VIP lounges she only got into using our father's fading connections. She loved to mock my career. Just last week at a family dinner, she waved her hand dismissively at my modest outfit and called my job unglamorous office labor. She laughed to her friends about how I sat behind a desk all day, dealing with customer complaints. Charlotte was entirely blind to the reality of what an elite global itinerary architect actually does. I do not just book commercial flights. I coordinate multi-million-dollar travel logistics for the ultra-wealthy. Last month, I managed the security details for a European royal family touring the Swiss Alps. I secure exclusive island buyouts for tech billionaires who demand absolute privacy. I command an arsenal of global resources. Charlotte thought I was a glorified customer service rep. She had no idea I held the power to blacklist anyone from the luxury travel sphere with a single phone call. Because I handled the intricate logistics for people with actual generational wealth, I knew exactly what real money looked like, and I knew my family had none left. I was the only one who saw the rot beneath the expensive floorboards of their rented chalet. During a brief visit a few weeks ago, I had moved a stack of Vogue magazines off my mother's side table to set down my coffee. Beneath the glossy covers lay a final notice envelope from the County Property Tax Division. I run complex financial models for a living. I did the math in my head before she could snatch the envelope away and hide it. Their accounts were bleeding dry. The walls were closing in, and they were trying to use me as their final escape hatch. The $85,000 honeymoon to French Polynesia was not just a romantic vacation for Charlotte and Preston. It was a desperate public relations stunt. It was designed to convince Preston's wealthy, judgmental family that the Susans were still solvent. My parents believed that if they could just trick Preston into marrying Charlotte, his family's trust fund would save them all from ruin. Preston came from old money, the kind of family that scrutinized every purchase and judged every choice. Charlotte was terrified of them. She knew that if they suspected she was broke, they would force Preston to call off the engagement. My parents knew it too. That was why they needed my corporate credit line. They needed the prestige of my agency's name on the booking confirmation to prove they belonged. I refused to let my professional integrity become a prop in their desperate theater. I had built a quiet, successful life down in Denver, far away from their toxic social climbing. I had a minimalist apartment I paid for with my own money. I had a career I built from the ground up. I was not going to sacrifice the foundation of my life to buy them 3 more months of fake smiles at the country club. If I caved to their ultimatum if I funded this absurd trip, they would drain me dry without hesitation. I would lose my hard-earned corporate reputation by tying my professional bond to a fraudulent lifestyle. I would lose my financial independence, and I would surrender any chance at a peaceful life. They would drag me down into their financial grave, step on my shoulders to climb out, and leave me buried in the dirt. I gripped the leather steering wheel tighter, my knuckles turning white in the dark cabin of the car. The decision was made. I was cutting the cord. I was not going to be their financial shield anymore. Tomorrow morning, I would walk into my sleek downtown office. I would log into the global reservation system. I would find Charlotte's flawless $85,000 itinerary, and I would erase it. But terminating a booking of that magnitude under a corporate license is not instantaneous. Agency protocol required a strict waiting period before a cancellation became permanent and notified the vendors. Tomorrow, the countdown would begin. 72 hours of digital limbo before the truth hit my mother's inbox. To keep them from storming my apartment during that window, I was going to need a distraction. I was going to have to play their game one last time. The next morning, I walked into my agency headquarters, located high above the bustling streets of downtown Denver. Stepping out of the private elevator, I felt the familiar, soothing quiet of my floor. The space was a stark contrast to the suffocating artificial warmth of my parents' rented chalet. My office was a sanctuary of floor-to-ceiling glass, polished concrete, and minimalist efficiency. There were no fake fireplaces here. There were only secure servers, encrypted communication lines, and the quiet execution of multi-million-dollar contracts. This was my domain. Up here, I was not the ungrateful daughter. I was the architect. I set my briefcase on the sleek surface of my desk, sat down in my ergonomic chair, and woke up my terminal. The global reservation system required dual authentication to access the elite tier portal. I pressed my thumb to the biometric scanner and typed in my passcode. The screen illuminated, displaying my current active dossiers. I bypassed the royal family itineraries and the corporate retreats, navigating directly to a file labeled with my sister's name. The Bora Bora honeymoon was a masterpiece of extravagant logistics. Clicking through the tabs, I reviewed the absurd level of indulgence my family had demanded I fund. 10 nights in a premium overwater bungalow with a glass floor, a private sunset catamaran cruise, a personal butler available around the clock, a couple's spa package featuring gold flake-infused massage oils. The itinerary even included a chartered helicopter transfer directly from the international airport to the resort dock, just so Charlotte could avoid walking past the commercial boat terminal. The total balance sat heavily at the bottom of the screen, $85,400. Currently, the entire amount was secured under my personal corporate bond. If I let the reservation stand, the agency would automatically deduct the funds from my accounts in less than a week. My parents were counting on my fear of conflict to paralyze me. They assumed I would just pay the invoice to avoid their screaming phone calls. I moved the cursor over the bright red button labeled Terminate Booking. I did not hesitate. I clicked the mouse. The system did not instantly vaporize the trip. Instead, a silver dialog box popped up on the center of the monitor. It read, Elite Tier Protocol Initiated. 72-hour hold engaged. In the ultra-high-end travel industry, sudden cancellations of this magnitude trigger automated safety measures. When dealing with exclusive island resorts and private aviation charters, the system implements a strict 3-day delay before sending the final cancellation notices to the global vendors. This protocol exists to protect wealthy clients from rash decisions made during temporary arguments. It gives them a grace period to change their minds. More importantly, it meant the automated email notifying the primary contact, my mother, would not be dispatched for exactly 3 days. A digital timer appeared in the top right corner of my screen. 71 hours and 59 minutes remaining. The countdown had officially started. I leaned back in my chair, watching the seconds tick away. While the delay protected my professional standing with the vendors, it presented an immediate logistical problem. If my family realized I had actually defied them, if they sensed even a hint of rebellion, they would not wait for an email. They would drive down the mountain, storm past the lobby security, and cause a public scene in the middle of my firm. They would try to humiliate me in front of my colleagues until I surrendered. I needed a distraction. I needed to feed their egos just enough to keep them distracted while the timer ran out. I reached into my purse, pulled out my phone, and opened my text messages. I navigated to my conversation with Charlotte and began typing a carefully constructed red herring. Charlotte, I wrote, send me the exact expiration dates on your and Preston's passports. The concierge desk needs them on file. Also, does Preston still have the severe shellfish allergy? The private chef needs to confirm the menu for your welcome dinner. I hit send and set the phone face down on my desk. The psychological trap was set. My sister is a textbook narcissist. She only sees what feeds her superiority. By asking for mundane, granular details about the trip, I was speaking her language. I was signaling that I had surrendered, that I was diligently doing the background work to make her life perfect. My phone buzzed less than a minute later. I turned it over. Charlotte had replied instantly. Sent the passport photos to your email, she wrote. I knew you would stop being so dramatic and do the right thing. Yes, the shellfish allergy is still active. Tell the chef to substitute the lobster with imported beluga caviar. Do not mess this up, Stella. I read the message and felt a cold, sharp smile form on my lips. They took the bait effortlessly. They were so blinded by their own entitlement that they could not fathom I would ever fight back. 10 minutes later, the distraction reached its peak. A notification popped up on my tablet. Charlotte had just posted a new story to her social media account. I clicked on her profile. The screen filled with a short video of Charlotte spinning around in a high-end bridal boutique, holding a designer silk beach cover-up against her waist. The caption was plastered across the video in sparkling pink letters. When your sister finally realizes you deserve the best, the caption read. Bora Bora Countdown is on. VIP. Treatment only. So blessed. I watched the video loop 3 times. She was gloating. She was broadcasting her victory to her thousands of shallow followers, actively bragging about the luxury lifestyle she believed I was financing. Her fiancé Preston even commented on the post with a champagne glass emoji. Preston was the heir to a regional shipping empire. He came from old, scrutinized money. He demanded perfection from everyone around him, and he made it very clear that his presence in Charlotte's life was entirely conditional on her family maintaining their elite standard. Charlotte was terrified of him, yet she clung to him because he was her only ticket out of my parents' sinking financial ship. I looked away from the phone and glanced back at my computer monitor. The digital timer ticked down silently. 71 hours and 40 minutes. The dramatic irony was delicious. Through the screen, I watched my family celebrating a victory they had not won. They were arrogant, comfortable, and entirely delusional. They were standing on a frozen lake, admiring their reflections in the ice, blissfully unaware that a massive fracture was spreading right beneath their designer boots. The freezing water was waiting to swallow them whole, and all I had to do was sit back and let the clock run out. I closed the social media app and opened a new blank itinerary document, returning my focus to my paying clients. The diversion worked perfectly. My family would spend the next 3 days packing their expensive luggage and boasting to their country club friends. They would leave me alone in my quiet sanctuary. But outside the digital world, the real-world pressures were already catching up to them. The 72-hour countdown was not the only timer running out. My parents had spent the last 5 years juggling predatory loans, dodging collection calls, and writing bad checks to maintain their rugged luxury facade. You can only outrun the banks for so long before the pavement runs out. While Charlotte was busy shopping for a honeymoon that no longer existed, my father was currently driving his leased Range Rover toward the exclusive Aspen Ski Club. He was planning to treat his wealthy golf buddies to an afternoon of expensive vintage bourbon, intending to put the entire tab on his platinum card. He had no idea that his fragile financial shell was about to crack in the most public way possible, setting off a chain reaction of humiliation that would bring their entire empire crashing down before my countdown even reached 0. While the digital clock on my office monitor quietly subtracted another hour from the 72-hour delay, the fragile foundation of my family's fake empire began to crack. 200 miles away in the snowy peaks of Aspen, my father was busy engineering his own public execution. The Aspen Peak Ski Club is a sanctuary of ultimate exclusivity. Membership requires a staggering initiation fee and an invitation approved by a board of directors. The interior features vaulted ceilings supported by massive exposed timber walls, lined with curated artwork and roaring stone hearths that smell of rich pine. Waiters in crisp white uniforms glide across polished hardwood floors, catering to the every whim of billionaires, tech moguls, and trust fund heirs. It was my father's favorite place on earth. He treated the club like his own personal throne room. That afternoon, he was holding court in the mahogany-paneled lounge. He sat in a plush leather armchair, surrounded by 3 wealthy real estate developers he desperately wanted to impress. To celebrate Charlotte's upcoming wedding, he ordered a round of the most expensive vintage bourbon the club stocked. He laughed loudly, swapping stories about summer yachts and winter ski trips, projecting the perfect image of a carefree patriarch. When the waiter returned carrying a subtle black leather folio, my father did not even look at the receipt. He simply pulled his sleek platinum credit card from his money clip and dropped it onto the silver tray. He continued his boasting, soaking in the admiration of his peers. 5 minutes later, the waiter returned. The man leaned down, keeping his voice carefully hushed to maintain discretion. "Sir," the waiter whispered, "the institution did not approve the transaction." My father froze. The color drained from his face, leaving him looking pale and sickly under the warm chandelier light. He quickly masked his panic with an arrogant scoff, waving his hand as if it were a minor inconvenience. "Fraud alert," my father announced to the table, forcing a chuckle. "The bank is always locking my accounts when I travel. Give me a moment to sort this out." He handed the waiter a different card, a gold one, and excused himself to the men's room. He stood in the marble-lined bathroom, staring at his reflection in the mirror, waiting for the inevitable. The waiter soon appeared at the door, shaking his head. The second card had also declined. The total bar tab was $4,000, and my father did not have a single cent of available credit to his name. Sitting at my desk in Denver, my encrypted phone buzzed. The caller ID flashed my father's name. I let it ring 3 times before sliding my finger across the screen to accept the call. "Stella," he hissed. His voice echoed slightly, betraying the fact that he was hiding in a bathroom stall. "Transfer $5,000 to my checking account right this second." I leaned back in my ergonomic chair and looked out the floor-to-ceiling window at the Denver skyline. "Hello to you too, Dad." "Do not play games with me," he snapped, his breathing heavy and erratic. "I am at the Peak Club. The bank put a security freeze on my cards and I need to close out a tab. Wire the cash right now. I will pay you back next week." It was the same lie he had used for a decade. He would never pay me back. I pulled up a client dossier on my secondary monitor, entirely unfazed by his manufactured emergency. "I am not your personal bank," I replied, my voice steady and cold. "I told you last night that my financial support is over. Call the bank and verify your identity if it is just a security freeze." "You ungrateful brat," he spat, his desperation twisting into vicious anger. "I am entertaining important colleagues. If I walk out there and cannot pay this bill, it will ruin my standing. Do this one simple thing for your family." "You maxed out your credit limits," I said, stating the simple, undeniable fact. "You spent money you do not have to impress men who do not care about you. You can wash dishes in the club kitchen for all I care." I pressed the end call button and placed the phone face down on my desk. The silence in my office felt incredibly satisfying. My father's humiliation at the ski club was not a sudden stroke of bad luck. It was the mathematical certainty of their reckless greed. During a brief visit to their chalet 3 weeks prior, I had seen the grim reality hiding in plain sight. I had been waiting in the grand foyer while my mother retrieved a coat. On the mahogany console table sat a neat stack of fashion magazines. Sticking out from beneath the glossy cover of a Vogue magazine was the corner of a bright red envelope. I had slipped the envelope out. It bore the official seal of the county tax assessor. The bold black letters across the top read, "Final Notice." I am a professional who runs complex financial forecasting models for a living. I did not need a calculator to understand the disaster printed on that page. They had not paid the property taxes on their rented luxury chalet in 3 years. I quickly did the mental math on the compound interest and the late penalties. They were mere weeks away from the county seizing the property and forcing a catastrophic eviction. I had slid the envelope back under the fashion magazine just as my mother returned, pretending I had seen nothing. Now the consequences were arriving. My father was forced to swallow his pride, walk back into the lounge, and beg one of the real estate developers to cover the $4,000 bill. The humiliation was absolute. In a town like Aspen, gossip moves faster than a winter avalanche. By the time my father handed his valet ticket to the parking attendant, text messages were already circulating through the elite social networks. The Susan family patriarch was bouncing checks. That gossip flowed directly into the phone of the worst possible person, Preston. Charlotte's fiancé was not just an arrogant trust fund heir. He was a highly calculated social parasite. Preston treated relationships the same way he treated his stock portfolio. He only invested in assets that increased his personal value. He demanded perfection from his partners, and his presence in Charlotte's life was entirely conditional on her family maintaining their flawless, elite standard. Preston was at a high-end tailor being fitted for a custom tuxedo when his phone vibrated with a message from a friend who had witnessed the bar tab incident. Preston did not hesitate. He left the tailor, drove his imported sports car straight to the chalet, and stormed through the front door. Charlotte was sitting in the living room, flipping through bridal catalogs and dreaming about the Bora Bora trip. Preston tossed his keys onto the counter with a loud crash. "Your father just begged for a handout at the Peak Club," Preston said, his voice dripping with disgust. He could not even cover a round of drinks. Charlotte dropped the catalog, her face flushing with panic. "What are you talking about? There must be a mistake. His bank probably put a hold on the account because of the wedding expenses." "Do not insult my intelligence," Preston snapped. He walked over and stood over her, his eyes cold and devoid of any affection. "My parents were already skeptical of your pedigree, Charlotte. They think your family is new money trash. If your father is bouncing checks in front of the most powerful men in this town, he is making me look like a fool." "Preston, please," Charlotte pleaded, tears welling in her eyes. "We are fine. Stella is finalizing the $85,000 honeymoon right now. We are going to French Polynesia. Does that sound like a family that is broke?" Preston looked at her, his expression unyielding. "You better pray she is, because I will not marry into a family of financial liabilities. If you embarrass me, if this wedding is anything less than spectacular, I am walking away." He turned on his heel and walked out the door, leaving Charlotte trembling on the sofa. The pressure cooker was now fully sealed, and the heat was rising to a boiling point. Charlotte was terrified. Her entire identity, her future, and her fragile ego were tied to Preston's approval. She was backed into a corner, completely unaware that the digital timer on my computer screen in Denver was steadily counting down to 0. The luxury vacation she was using as her final defense did not exist. The trap was set, and the family was about to sprint directly into the jaws of a disaster they could never escape. The digital timer on my secondary monitor blinked silently. 0 hours, 0 minutes, 0 seconds. It was exactly 10 in the morning on a Friday. Deep within the agency's secure servers, an automated script executed its final command. 3 identical electronic messages were dispatched simultaneously to my mother, my father, and my sister. The subject line was generated in stark, clinical corporate terminology. Notice of itinerary termination. I was sitting in my glass-walled sanctuary, completely immersed in a high-stakes video conference with a prominent investment banker from London. We were finalizing the complex logistics for an exclusive 2-week excursion across the Serengeti. I was verbally confirming the deployment of a private security detail for his upcoming trip when my desktop tablet vibrated softly. It was an urgent alert from the front desk downstairs. Before I could even read the text on the screen, a chaotic noise erupted from the reception area. My firm is intentionally designed to project absolute tranquility. The lobby features imported Italian marble, ambient recessed lighting, and expensive acoustic paneling meant to absorb excess sound. It serves as a peaceful retreat for the ultra-wealthy to plan their escapes. That pristine silence was abruptly shattered by the sound of heavy entrance doors slamming violently against their metal stops. Through the transparent barrier of my workspace, I watched my relatives storm into the lobby. They looked like feral animals invading a museum. My mother led the charge, her face flushed a dark crimson, clutching her smartphone as if it were a weapon. Charlotte trailed closely behind her, designer sunglasses askew, sobbing hysterically. My father brought up the rear, his fists clenched tight, his posture radiating a toxic, desperate aggression. "Where is she?" my mother yelled. Her shrill voice echoed off the polished stone floors, startling a high-net-worth client who was quietly sipping espresso in the waiting lounge. "Get out here right now!" I did not panic. I felt a strange, profound sense of calm wash over me. The anxiety that had plagued my entire adult life simply evaporated, replaced by an impenetrable resolve. I looked at the webcam offered my British client, a polite smile, and asked him to excuse me for a brief moment. I muted my microphone, turned off my camera, and stood up from my desk. I opened the door and stepped out into the main corridor. The moment Charlotte saw me, she unleashed a guttural wail. "You ruined my life," my sister screamed. She pointed a trembling finger at my chest. "The Bora Bora trip is gone. Preston is going to cancel the wedding. You vindictive monster." My father marched past the reception desk, completely ignoring the terrified receptionist, who was desperately pressing the silent alarm button located under her keyboard. He stopped 10 feet away from me, his chest heaving with exertion. His eyes were wide with a manic fury I had never witnessed before. "You are going to log back into that computer and fix this mistake immediately," he commanded. His tone was not a request. It was the bark of a tyrant losing control of his kingdom. "You are going to authorize the $85,000 right now, or I swear I will tear this place apart piece by piece." I looked at the three of them. They were completely unhinged. This was the dark reality of their society when the money dries up. Strip away the country club memberships and the vintage bourbon, and they were nothing but desperate extortionists. I stood my ground, my posture perfectly straight, my voice carrying clearly across the marble floor. "I made my choice," I told them. The words hung in the air, cold and definitive. "The booking is gone. My financial support is gone. It is too late." My mother gasped, pressing a hand to her chest as if she had been physically struck by an invisible force. "You cannot do this to us. We are your blood. Blood does not demand ransom," I replied. "You gave me an ultimatum. I chose to walk away. Now get out of my building." The blunt rejection snapped the last remaining thread of my father's restraint. His fragile ego, already battered by the declined credit card incident days prior, could not handle being publicly defied by the daughter he viewed as a subservient ATM. He let out a furious roar and lunged forward. He raised his arm, his hand forming a tight fist, intending to strike me, right there in the middle of my own firm. He never even made it within 3 feet of me. Our agency caters to billionaires, politicians, and foreign dignitaries. We do not employ standard security personnel. We hire former elite military contractors. Before the patriarch of my family could complete his downward swing, a massive figure in a tailored dark suit stepped out from the blind spot near the corridor entrance. It was the head of corporate security. He moved with terrifying speed and clinical precision. The guard intercepted the incoming arm, twisted it sharply behind the attacker's back, and drove a knee into the back of his thigh. The older man collapsed to the floor with a heavy thud, crying out in shock and pain. "Do not move," the security chief ordered, his voice a low, dangerous rumble that commanded immediate compliance. 2 more guards materialized from the nearby elevators. They flanked the 2 women who were now screaming in genuine terror. The polished facade was entirely destroyed. They were being treated like common trespassers subdued on the floor of a corporate lobby. "Let him go," my mother wailed, trying to push past one of the suited men. "She is our daughter. Tell them to let him go." I stood motionless, watching the scene unfold with absolute detachment. I did not intervene. I did not ask the guards to show mercy. I just watched as the security team hoisted the struggling man to his feet. They pinned his arms securely and marched him toward the main exit. The other guards corralled the weeping matriarch and the hysterical bride-to-be, forcing them out through the heavy glass entryways. The guards deposited them roughly onto the cold concrete sidewalk outside the building. The doors slid shut, locking automatically with a solid mechanical click. I stood inside the climate-controlled lobby, staring through the transparent barrier at the people who had emotionally abused me for a decade. The man pounded his fists against the reinforced glass, his face contorted in rage, shouting curses I could not hear through the heavy soundproofing. Charlotte collapsed against the exterior brick wall, sobbing into her hands, her dream of a French Polynesia honeymoon permanently erased from existence. The older woman just stared at me, her eyes wide, with a horrifying realization. The umbilical cord of cash was officially severed. The physical confrontation marked the point of no return. There would be no tearful apologies, no awkward holiday dinners, no pretending we were a happy unit ever again. The old bond was dead, replaced by open, hostile warfare. I turned around, offered an apologetic nod to the stunned clients in the waiting area, and walked back into my workspace. I sat down at my desk, unmuted my microphone, and calmly resumed my conversation with the London banker finalizing his private safari, as if nothing had happened. But out on that sidewalk, my former family was not simply going to walk away and accept defeat. They had lost their primary source of funding, and they were terrified of Preston discovering the truth about the canceled trip. Since they could no longer control my wallet, they decided they had to destroy my reputation. As they drove back up the mountain, a new vicious plan was already forming in their minds. They were about to launch a social smear campaign, completely unaware that their toxic gossip would force me to deploy an intelligence network they never knew I possessed. Exiled from the climate-controlled sanctuary of my corporate headquarters, my former family retreated to the only battlefield they had left. The physical threat had been neutralized by my security team, so they pivoted immediately to psychological and social warfare. In the rarefied air of Aspen, reputation is the ultimate currency. If you can control the narrative, you can control the town. Since they could no longer siphon cash from my accounts, they decided to bankrupt my character. The smear campaign began less than 24 hours after they were escorted out of my lobby. My mother, a master of weaponized victimhood, struck first. She hastily organized a sympathy luncheon at one of the most exclusive French bistros in the ski village. She invited 6 of the most prominent, gossipy socialites in her circle. These were women married to hedge fund managers and real estate tycoons, women who thrived on the destruction of others to feel secure in their own status. Sitting at a corner table draped in crisp white linen, my mother left her imported sea bass untouched. She wore a simple, understated cashmere sweater, carefully chosen to project fragile elegance. She dabbed at her dry eyes with a cloth napkin and wove a masterful, devastating lie. She told the table that they had trusted me with Charlotte's wedding escrow account. She claimed I had drained the funds to finance my own selfish, secret lifestyle in Denver. We gave her everything, my mother whispered to her captivated audience. We paid for her education, we supported her career, and she repays us by stealing her own sister's honeymoon money. I just do not know who she is anymore. The socialites gasped, leaning in closer, their eyes wide with predatory excitement. The rumor spread through the mountain town faster than a wildfire and dry brush. By sunset, the story had morphed. Whispers echoed through the locker rooms of the country club and the valets of the high-end restaurants. I was no longer just an ungrateful daughter. I was a thief. I was a jealous spinster trying to sabotage a beautiful bride. Charlotte took the digital front. She parked her leased luxury SUV against a picturesque snowy backdrop, turned the camera on herself, and recorded a masterful performance. She forced a single tear to roll down her perfectly contoured cheek. Using every trendy buzzword she could remember, she posted a video to her thousands of followers, crying about financial abuse and toxic family members. It is just so hard when the people you trust the most try to ruin your happiness. Charlotte sniffled into the camera. But I am choosing peace. I am not letting my sister's jealousy destroy my dream wedding. Her followers flooded the comments section with blind support, praising her bravery and sending digital prayers. But the true masterpiece of delusion occurred later that evening, inside the mahogany lounge of the Aspen Peak Ski Club. Charlotte held court at a low table near the roaring stone hearth. She was surrounded by her wealthy bridesmaids and several of Preston's prominent fraternity brothers. She sipped a hot toddy, radiating an eerie, manufactured confidence. Anyone observing her would assume she was a woman holding all the cards. Stella threw a ridiculous tantrum. Charlotte laughed, waving her hand dismissively. She is just a sad corporate drone. She sits in a sterile office all day dealing with spreadsheets, and she hates that I am marrying into a respectable family. She tried to cancel our reservations out of pure spite. One of Preston's friends frowned, swirling his drink. So, what is happening with the Bora Bora trip? Preston told us the booking was terminated. It is a minor inconvenience, Charlotte scoffed, tossing her hair over her shoulder. Stella's agency was overcharging us anyway. They are practically a scam. My father and I are just rebooking the overwater bungalow ourselves tomorrow morning. In fact, since we are cutting out Stella's exorbitant commission fees, we are upgrading the package. I am adding a private chef and extending the yacht charter. We do not need her sad little office life to travel in style. The group nodded, raising their glasses in a toast to her resilience. The dramatic irony of the scene was staggering. The audience listening to her boast believed she was a wealthy heiress, casually swatting away a pesky sibling. They had no idea they were looking at a woman standing on the edge of a sheer financial cliff. Charlotte was loudly bragging about upgrading an $85,000 vacation while carrying a wallet that did not contain a single active credit card. Her father had bounced a check in that very same room just days prior. They were projecting an image of limitless wealth while possessing zero liquidity. They did not have the funds to buy a commercial plane ticket to a neighboring state, let alone secure a VIP compound in French Polynesia. Down in Denver, the toxic ripples of their gossip began reaching my network. A few of the older, more conservative clients who traveled in those same Aspen circles sent tentative emails asking polite but probing questions about my agency's financial stability. A lesser person would have panicked. A desperate person would have taken to social media to post bank statements or called those country club wives to scream the truth. I did none of those things. I ignored the noise entirely. Let them talk. Gossip is a cheap commodity. Data is expensive, and data always wins. As a global itinerary architect, I do not just book luxury suites. I manage risk. When a billionaire hires my firm to orchestrate a month-long excursion, I must ensure they are legitimate. My agency retains a private intelligence network staffed by former financial analysts to run deep background checks on prospective clients. We verify liquid assets, scan for hidden liabilities, and assess credit risks to protect our global vendors. I sat alone in the quiet hum of my glass office, the city lights of Denver glowing outside my window. I opened a secure terminal and directed my vetting apparatus toward my own family. I fed my parents' names into the deep search algorithms and waited. The reports compiled within minutes, painting a bleak, undeniable picture of their ruin. The digital files scrolled across my monitor, providing a forensic autopsy of their fake wealth. I watched their debt load reach critical mass in real time. There were 4 maxed-out credit lines with interest rates bordering on predatory. There were multiple missed payments on both luxury vehicles. The country club dues were 90 days in arrears. Most crucially, I verified the status of the red envelope I had seen weeks ago. The county tax assessor had formally registered a pre-foreclosure notice on their rented chalet. The satisfaction washing over me was profound. I did not need to defend myself against their desperate lies. I just had to watch the clock. They were frantically digging their own graves, tossing the dirt over their shoulders while bragging about the view. They thought they were burying my reputation, but they were actually excavating a pit they could never climb out of. The social camouflage was holding for now, but the sheer weight of their financial obligations was causing the ground to fracture. Their loud public damage control was creating a dangerous friction. Charlotte's aggressive boasting about upgrading the Bora Bora trip had served its purpose of saving face with her friends, but it achieved a much more lethal outcome. It caught the attention of her fiancé. Preston was not a fool. He was an opportunist. He knew the cost of luxury, and he possessed a predator's instinct for weakness. He had already witnessed my father fail to pay a bar tab. Now he was listening to Charlotte make wild, unsubstantiated claims about upgrading a honeymoon he knew for a fact had just been canceled. The math was not aligning. The stories were contracting. While Charlotte was busy crying on the internet and drinking at the ski club, Preston excused himself from the social circuit. He retreated to his own quiet corner of Aspen, pulled out his phone, and began making calls to his father's estate lawyers. He decided to bypass the gossip and dig into the Susan family ledgers himself. The family had spent all their energy trying to destroy me, leaving their flanks entirely exposed to the one person who held the power to ruin Charlotte's future. Preston was about to discover the staggering truth, and his reaction would unleash a new layer of betrayal that would push my sister into an act of pure criminal desperation. The narrative focus now shifted away from my quiet office in Denver, moving directly into the cold, calculating mind of my sister's fiancé. Preston sat in the leather chair of his private condominium overlooking the ski village. He held a crystal glass of sparkling water, staring at the screen of his laptop. Preston came from a lineage of old wealth. His grandfather built a shipping logistics empire on the East Coast, and his father expanded it into commercial real estate. His family understood the true anatomy of affluence. Real money does not need to shout. It operates in silence, securing assets and minimizing liabilities. My parents, on the other hand, were screaming their fabricated status from the mountaintops. Preston possessed a predator's instinct for weakness, and the incident at the ski club had triggered every single alarm bell in his head. He set his glass down and dialed the direct number for his father's lead estate attorney. He bypassed the pleasantries and requested a discreet, comprehensive probe into Richard and Patricia Susan. He wanted public records, property deeds, and county tax assessments pulled immediately. An hour later, the attorney called back. The findings were absolutely catastrophic. The attorney detailed the financial carnage with clinical precision. The luxury chalet was not owned outright. It was heavily mortgaged and currently sitting under a pre-foreclosure lien from the county tax assessor. The expensive vehicles were leased, and the payments were severely delinquent. The country club memberships were past due, suspended pending account review. Preston felt a surge of pure disgust. He had been tricked. Charlotte was not a wealthy heiress capable of elevating his social standing. She was a massive liability. Marrying her would infect his family's pristine financial lineage with toxic debt and public embarrassment. The logical move was to sever ties immediately. A normal man would call off the engagement, demand the custom diamond ring back, and walk away. But Preston was not governed by standard morality. He was a creature of extraction. He looked at the disastrous situation and saw an opportunity for one final, massive payout. Charlotte had been bragging publicly all over town about an $85,000 excursion to French Polynesia. She claimed they were upgrading the package, securing a private chef, and extending a yacht charter. Preston knew her parents were bankrupt, but he assumed my sister would find a way to manipulate me or another relative into footing the bill to save face. He wanted that trip. He desired 10 days of ultimate indulgence in an overwater bungalow entirely free of charge. A dark strategy formed in his mind. He would play along. He would maintain the facade of the loving partner. He would board that first-class flight, drink the imported champagne, and enjoy the tropical paradise. The moment the return flight landed on American soil, he would execute his double cross. He would dump her at the baggage claim, cite irreconcilable differences, and leave her family to drown in their own ruin. To ensure Charlotte actually delivered the vacation, Preston knew he had to turn up the heat. He needed to corner her, making the luxury honeymoon the singular condition of their continued relationship. He arranged to meet her at a secluded table inside a high-end coffee boutique in the village. Charlotte arrived wearing a designer winter coat, carrying an expensive handbag she could not actually afford. She smiled brightly, attempting to project the radiant joy of a bride preparing for her big day. Preston did not return the smile. He did not pull out her chair or offer a warm greeting. He just stared at her with vacant, predatory eyes. "What is wrong?" Charlotte asked. Her voice faltered as she took her seat. "You look so serious today." "My parents are growing concerned," Preston lied smoothly, his tone completely devoid of any emotion. "They are hearing disturbing whispers around town about your father. The incident at the club with the declined payment was humiliating for my family name. My mother is questioning whether your family meets our standards." Charlotte swallowed hard. Her manicured fingers gripped the edge of the marble table, her knuckles turning white. "That was just a banking error," she stammered, repeating the fabricated story she had practiced. "My father sorted it out immediately. People are just jealous and spreading rumors." Preston leaned forward, invading her personal space. His voice dropped to a low, threatening register. "I do not care about rumors. I care about optics. My family requires perfection. We will not be associated with a financial disaster. We are not a disaster." Charlotte pleaded. Her eyes were shining with unshed tears. "We are fine. Everything is perfectly fine." "Then prove it," Preston demanded. He delivered the ultimatum with brutal precision. "This honeymoon to Bora Bora is the test. My parents are watching closely. If this trip is anything less than spectacular, if there are any compromises, any canceled reservations, or any downgraded flights, the wedding is off. I will walk away and you will never see me again." The words struck Charlotte like a physical blow. The illusion of unconditional love shattered into a million jagged pieces right there in the coffee shop. Preston did not love her. He loved the status she was supposed to provide. Their entire relationship was a transactional arrangement, a hollow business deal masquerading as romance. "I need the finalized itinerary by the end of the week," Preston continued, completely ignoring her visible distress. "I want to see the confirmation codes for the VIP bungalow and the private helicopter charter. If you cannot provide them, I will know you have been lying to me." He stood up, left his coffee untouched, and walked out the door. Charlotte sat frozen at the table. The walls of her fabricated reality were crushing her. She had spent the last 24 hours publicly boasting to everyone in Aspen that she was upgrading her luxury vacation. She had mocked my career and claimed her family was paying for the trip independently. Now the terrifying truth stared her right in the face. She had no money. Her parents had no money. I had completely cut off their access to my accounts. She was staring into the abyss of total social and personal ruin. If she did not produce an $85,000 itinerary in a matter of days, Preston would leave her. Her country club friends would mock her. Her entire identity would be vaporized. Panic, raw and suffocating, took hold of her mind. She could not accept defeat. She could not let Preston walk away and expose her as a fraud. She needed a miracle, or she needed to commit a desperate act. She left the boutique and drove aimlessly through the snowy streets, her mind racing through impossible scenarios. She needed access to a massive amount of capital, and she needed it instantly. The banks had already locked her parents out. Their friends would never lend them that kind of cash. Her thoughts circled back to the one person who possessed the resources she desperately required. Me. She knew I would never authorize the payment. I had made that perfectly clear when I let my security team throw them out onto the sidewalk. But Charlotte did not just want my money anymore. She felt entitled to it. She convinced herself that I owed her this trip for causing her so much stress. The desperation mutated into a dangerous, criminal audacity. She began searching her memory for any vulnerability, any backdoor into my financial vault. That was when a specific, fatal detail surfaced in her panicked mind: the safety deposit box key. During the argument at the chalet, my mother had demanded the brass key under the guise of updating family insurance documents. I had tossed it onto the table without a second thought. Charlotte remembered my mother slipping that key into her purse. Charlotte knew exactly what else was kept inside that secure vault at the local bank branch. It was not just insurance paperwork. It held a backup corporate travel card and physical copies of my agency licensing credentials. It was the master key to my professional empire. A treacherous plan took root in her head. She was no longer just a spoiled bride trying to save face. She was about to cross a line that would permanently alter the trajectory of all our lives. The trap I had patiently waited for was finally taking shape, and my sister was preparing to dive headfirst into a felony. I would later piece together the exact sequence of events through police reports and digital forensics, tracking the precise moments my sister orchestrated her own destruction. When Preston walked out of the coffee boutique, leaving his ultimatum hanging in the air, Charlotte did not experience a moment of self-reflection. She did not consider the toxic nature of her relationship or the financial ruin looming over our parents. She only felt the suffocating terror of losing her status. Her entire identity was anchored to that $85,000 honeymoon. Without it, she was nobody. She sprinted out of the coffee shop, climbed into her leased luxury vehicle, and sped back up the winding roads toward the rented chalet. The tires slipped on the icy pavement, mirroring her precarious grip on reality. She burst through the heavy wooden front doors, her chest heaving, tears streaming down her face. She found our mother, pacing the hardwood floors of the living room, a half-empty glass of cheap wine in her hand. The matriarch was already spiraling from the country club humiliation my father had suffered days prior. Charlotte blurted out the disastrous news. She told our mother that Preston was threatening to cancel the wedding. She explained that his wealthy family demanded absolute perfection, and they expected to see the finalized French Polynesia itinerary by the end of the week. If the VIP reservations were not secured, the engagement was finished. The trust fund would vanish. The last remaining lifeline to Aspen High society would be permanently severed. Panic consumed the older woman. She dropped her wine glass onto the expensive rug, completely ignoring the dark stains spreading across the fabric. They were out of options. The banks had frozen their accounts. Their wealthy friends had stopped returning their calls. They possessed zero liquidity and maxed out credit lines. They needed a massive injection of capital, and they needed it instantly. In that moment of pure, blinding desperation, a fatal memory surfaced in my sister's mind. She looked at the mahogany coffee table where we had argued 3 weeks earlier. She remembered the small brass key I had tossed onto the polished wood. The safety deposit box, Charlotte said, her voice trembling with a sudden, dangerous realization. Stella left the key. She must have emergency funds stashed in the bank vault. My mother's eyes widened. Decades ago, when I first opened my primary accounts, she had insisted on being a co-signer on a secure deposit box. She claimed it was a necessary precaution in case of a medical emergency. I had foolishly agreed, and over the years, I simply forgot her name remained on the access registry. It was a minor administrative oversight that was about to trigger a federal crime. They did not waste a single second. They grabbed their coats and drove directly to the local bank branch in the village. The winter sun was setting, casting long, dark shadows across the snow-covered sidewalks. They walked through the glass doors, projecting a false air of calm superiority. My mother approached the teller, presented her identification, and produced the brass key from her designer handbag. Because her name was still legally attached to the registry, the vault custodian did not ask any questions. He escorted the two women into the sterile, climate-controlled room deep within the building. The air smelled of ozone and polished steel. He inserted his master key, my mother inserted the brass key, and the heavy metal door clicked open. The custodian pulled out the long rectangular container, set it on a private viewing table, and left them alone in the room. Charlotte and my mother opened the lid, expecting to find thick stacks of $100 bills or valuable jewelry they could pawn. Instead, they found a single manila envelope. Charlotte tore the envelope open and dumped the contents onto the table. There was no cash. There was only a heavy, matte, black corporate credit card issued in my name, linked directly to my travel agency's primary operating account. Alongside the card sat a laminated document displaying my elite global itinerary architect credential numbers, the digital passcodes required to access the secure booking portals. A normal person would have looked at those items, realized they belonged to a corporate entity, and placed them back inside the box. But my family did not operate on logic or morality. They operated on entitlement. My mother stared at the heavy black plastic and convinced herself that this was fair compensation for raising me. Charlotte convinced herself that I was merely throwing a stubborn tantrum and that I would eventually accept the charges once the wedding was saved. They possessed zero understanding of corporate finance. They viewed the card as a magical solution to their impending ruin. They pocketed the card and the credentials, locked the empty box, and drove back to the chalet. The transition from a petty family dispute to a catastrophic felony happened the moment Charlotte booted up her laptop. Sitting at the kitchen island, she bypassed the standard consumer travel websites and navigated directly to my agency's proprietary portal. The screen prompted her for an authorized user identification. She typed in the alphanumeric credential codes from the laminated document. The system verified the numbers and granted her full administrative access, assuming it was me operating from a remote location. Charlotte's fingers flew across the keyboard. She navigated to the French Polynesia destination packages. She selected the premium overwater bungalow with the glass floor. She added the private helicopter transfer, the personal chef, and the luxury yacht charter. She rebuilt the exact itinerary I had canceled just days prior. Because the dates were rapidly approaching, the system required an immediate, non-refundable VIP deposit to secure the elite vendors. The monitor displayed the required total: $40,000. Charlotte did not hesitate. Her desire to prove Preston wrong eclipsed any remaining shred of common sense. She pulled the black corporate card from her pocket. She typed the 16 digits into the payment gateway. She entered my name, the expiration date, and the security code on the back. She moved the cursor over the submit button and clicked the mouse. The screen loaded a small circular icon spinning as it processed the massive transaction. A few seconds later, the screen flashed brightly. A green confirmation checkmark appeared, followed by a generated reservation code. The money was gone instantly, wired across international lines to secure her tropical fantasy. A massive rush of dopamine flooded her brain. She felt an overwhelming sense of victory. She had survived the crisis. She had secured her billionaire fiancé and defeated her uncooperative sister. She was so intoxicated by her own perceived brilliance that she had to broadcast it to the world. She grabbed her smartphone and snapped a picture of the laptop screen. She was careful to crop out my name and the agency logo, but she made sure the destination, the VIP status, and the confirmed booking code were clearly visible. She opened her social media application and uploaded the image to her story. She typed a caption across the photo in sparkling letters. "The dream is back on," she wrote. #blessed. By posting that photograph, she sealed her own fate. She had just provided time-stamped, publicly accessible evidence of her own crime. This was no longer a disagreement over who should pay for a vacation. By using stolen administrative credentials and a corporate credit card to authorize a massive international purchase, Charlotte crossed a devastating legal boundary. She had committed identity theft. She had committed federal wire fraud. The digital footprint was permanent and entirely traceable. The IP address linked directly to the router inside their rented chalet. The transaction was logged on multiple secure servers across different continents. My sister had just elevated the stakes from a country club drama to a 10-year sentence in a federal penitentiary. She had crossed a moral and legal line from which there was absolutely no return, completely oblivious to the sheer magnitude of the destruction she had just invited into her life. She sat in the kitchen smiling at the incoming likes and congratulations from her shallow followers, feeling like a queen reclaiming her throne. She had no idea that the digital transaction data had already left the chalet, bounced through the global banking servers, and triggered an automatic security protocol. That protocol generated an encrypted alert, which was currently traveling through the cellular network, heading straight for my phone, while I sat down to enjoy a quiet, peaceful dinner in Denver. I sat at a corner table inside a 5-star restaurant in the heart of the Denver financial district. The lighting was dim and intimate, casting a warm glow over the polished mahogany tables and the pristine silver cutlery. Soft jazz played in the background, providing a soothing soundtrack to the end of a very long week. I had just finished negotiating a complex travel itinerary for a foreign diplomat, and I was rewarding myself with a rare, quiet evening alone. The waiter had just poured me a glass of a rare vintage Cabernet Sauvignon. I raised the crystal glass to my lips, savoring the rich, oaky finish. My encrypted smartphone sat face down next to my dessert fork. The device was custom configured by my agency's IT department to handle sensitive client data and financial authorizations. It was designed to remain silent unless a critical security threshold was breached. The phone vibrated. It was a single, sustained pulse. I set my wine glass down and turned the device over. The screen illuminated, displaying a high-priority security alert from the Global Fraud Division of my corporate banking provider. The notification was flagged in bright red text, indicating an unauthorized transaction attempt on my primary elite tier account. I unlocked the screen and opened the banking application. The digital ledger loaded and the details of the transaction materialized before my eyes. The vendor was listed as the Premium Resort in Bora Bora. The purchase amount was $40,000. The classification was categorized as a non-refundable VIP reservation deposit. I stared at the numbers. My pulse remained steady. I did not drop my phone, nor did I gasp in shock. My training as an itinerary architect had conditioned me to handle sudden crises with cold, calculating logic. I tapped on the transaction details to expand the metadata. The banking software provided the exact IP address of the device that initiated the payment. I recognized the numerical sequence immediately. It was the static IP address assigned to the wireless router inside my parents' rented Aspen chalet. The reality of the situation crystallized in my mind with sharp clarity. My mother and my sister had somehow bypassed my security protocols. The missing piece of the puzzle snapped into place: the brass key. During our confrontation 3 weeks ago, I had carelessly tossed the spare safety deposit box key onto the coffee table. I had forgotten that my mother remained on the bank registry from a decade ago. They had driven to the bank, accessed the vault, and stolen my backup corporate travel card and my administrative licensing credentials. Charlotte had logged into my agency portal, impersonated me, and authorized a $40,000 charge to save her wedding. A typical sibling would have reacted with immediate panic. A normal person would have slammed the approve or decline button on the screen, frantically dialing their sister's phone number to scream demands and hurl insults. I did not do any of those things. I picked up my wine glass and took another slow, deliberate sip. I let the rich flavor settle on my tongue while my mind ran through the legal implications of what Charlotte had just done. If I pressed the button to decline the transaction, the bank would block the funds. The reservation would fail. Charlotte would simply try again, or she would attempt to use the card somewhere else. It would be classified as attempted fraud, a minor offense easily brushed away by a clever defense attorney. But if I allowed the transaction to clear, the funds would move. The money would cross state lines and international borders. The digital signature would be permanently encoded into the global banking ledger. The moment those funds left American soil, my sister's desperate action would escalate from a foolish mistake to a federal crime: identity theft, wire fraud. I set the glass down. I made a calculated, irreversible choice. I did not cancel the charge. I watched the screen as the banking software processed the payment. The red alert shifted to a green confirmation checkmark. The $40,000 vanished from my corporate credit limit. The trap was now primed and loaded. I did not call my family. Instead, I navigated to the contact directory on my encrypted device and initiated a secure voice call to the Global Fraud Division of my corporate card issuer. A senior risk analyst answered the line within 2 rings. "I am reporting a compromised corporate account and a stolen administrative identity," I told the analyst. My voice was calm and measured. "The $40,000 charge that just processed to the French Polynesia vendor is fraudulent. I know the exact location of the perpetrator, and I have the IP logs to prove it." The analyst immediately locked the account, preventing any further charges, and initiated the formal fraud investigation protocols. But I was not finished. A corporate bank dispute was not enough to secure the justice my family deserved. I needed to ensure the authorities had an airtight case. I opened the social media application on my phone and navigated to Charlotte's public profile. There it was, sitting right at the top of her feed, a photograph of a laptop screen displaying the confirmed Bora Bora reservation code. The caption read, "The dream is back on. #blessed." She had literally published a digital confession. She provided a time-stamped photograph of the stolen goods, bragging to the entire world about her successful theft. I took a high-resolution screenshot of her post. I exported the IP address logs from my banking application. I drafted a concise, detailed email documenting the timeline of the theft, the location of the safety deposit box, and the exact statutes I believed had been violated. I attached the screenshots and the digital ledgers. I addressed the email to the Cybercrime Division of the federal authorities. I hit send. The trap snapped shut. The heavy steel jaws closed with finality. There was no going back, no undoing the damage, no room for negotiation. My sister had walked directly into the snare, and I had just handed the rope to the federal prosecutors. I ordered a decadent chocolate dessert, leaned back in my chair, and enjoyed the rest of my evening in total peace. 200 miles away, shielded by the snowy peaks of the Rocky Mountains, my family was busy celebrating their profound ignorance. Ignorant of the federal investigation I had just launched, they decided to host a lavish pre-wedding celebration dinner at the Aspen Peak Ski Club. They had convinced a junior club manager to waive the deposit requirement for the private dining room, using Preston's formidable family name as leverage. They filled the room with wealthy guests, expensive floral arrangements, and flowing champagne. Charlotte sat at the head of the long table, glowing with manufactured radiance. She held Preston's hand, whispering in his ear about the private helicopter transfer and the glass-bottom floors of their tropical bungalow. Preston offered a rare, genuine smile, satisfied that his harsh ultimatum had forced his future in-laws to deliver the exorbitant luxury he demanded. My mother drifted through the room, her designer gown shimmering under the ambient lighting. She laughed with the wives of real estate developers, accepting their congratulations and soaking in their admiration. My father stood near the bar, swirling his drink and puffing out his chest, feeling like the undisputed king of the mountain once again. They believed they had won. They thought their sheer audacity had conquered my resistance. They assumed I was sitting in Denver crying over the stolen funds, too intimidated by their social standing to fight back. They were utterly convinced that the Bora Bora trip was secure and their elite status was permanently cemented. They were hosting a victory party on the deck of a sinking ship. They were dancing and laughing, completely oblivious to the reality that the financial and legal guillotine had already been released. The heavy blade was currently swinging downward at terminal velocity, picking up speed with every passing hour. The Federal Cybercrime Division was silently processing the evidence I had provided, but the authorities move at their own methodical pace. Before the men in federal windbreakers could arrive at the chalet to place my sister in handcuffs, a much faster, much more relentless predator was preparing to strike. The banks and the local creditors had run out of patience. The hidden debts, the skipped payments, and the predatory loans were reaching their breaking point. My family was about to discover that while they were busy stealing $40,000 to impress their country club friends, they had forgotten to pay the bills that actually mattered. The illusion of their rugged luxury was about to be shattered in front of the very people they were trying so desperately to impress. While the silent machinery of justice operated at a deliberate pace inside the Federal Cybercrime Division, a much swifter reckoning arrived at the doorstep of my former family. For years, my secret cash injections had served as the invisible mortar holding their fragile financial facade together. Every time a collection agency called or a final notice arrived in the mail, I had quietly transferred the exact amount needed to keep the wolves at bay. I did it out of a misplaced sense of guilt, believing I was protecting them. Once I severed that lifeline, the protective barrier vanished. The grace periods expired. The high-risk lenders, tired of empty promises and bounced checks, finally moved in for the kill. The collapse did not happen in private. It unfolded under the glittering chandeliers of the annual Snow and Stars charity auction hosted in the grand ballroom of the Aspen Peak Ski Club. This event was the undisputed highlight of the local winter social calendar. Wealthy entrepreneurs and prominent heirs gathered to outbid each other on luxury vacations, custom jewelry, and fine art, all under the guise of philanthropy. In reality, the auction was a bloodless battleground where the elite measured their superiority in dollars spent. My mother viewed this night as her personal coronation. She believed that participating in the high-stakes bidding would firmly establish her status in front of Preston and his scrutinizing family. She arrived at the club wearing a floor-length emerald gown, her head held high, projecting an aura of untouchable prestige. My father walked beside her in a tailored tuxedo, exuding the hollow confidence of a man who still believed his own lies. Charlotte and Preston followed closely behind, forming a picture-perfect quartet of rugged luxury. They handed the keys of their leased luxury vehicles to the valet attendants, completely unaware that those vehicles were already being targeted by a recovery team. Inside the ballroom, the atmosphere was electric with wealth and whispered gossip. Waiters circulated with silver trays of champagne. The auctioneer, a charismatic man with a booming voice, stood on a raised stage directing the flow of money. Midway through the evening, a stunning landscape painting by a renowned local artist was wheeled onto the stage. The opening bid was set at $5,000. My mother saw her opportunity to secure her dominance. She waited until a rival socialite raised her paddle and then immediately countered. The bidding war escalated quickly, drawing the attention of the entire room. Preston watched from the sidelines, nodding in approval at the display of financial force. $10,000, my mother called out, her voice echoing clearly across the silent ballroom. She offered a triumphant smile to her rival. The auctioneer scanned the crowd. Going once, going twice, sold to the generous lady in the emerald gown. A polite round of applause rippled through the audience. My mother basked in the validation, feeling the intoxicating rush of social victory. A junior event coordinator dressed in a crisp black suit and carrying a portable electronic payment terminal approached their table to finalize the donation. This was standard procedure at the club, ensuring the charity collected the funds before the guests departed. My mother opened her designer clutch and retrieved her premium credit card. She handed it to the coordinator with a practiced, elegant flourish. The young man smiled, inserted the card into the digital reader, and waited for the authorization. The machine beeped, a harsh, flat tone. The screen flashed a bright red error message. The coordinator frowned, tapping the screen. "I apologize," he murmured, keeping his voice low. "The transaction was declined. Let me try running it one more time." He swiped the magnetic strip. The machine beeped again. The red text remained on the screen. The polite smile vanished from the coordinator's face, replaced by a look of awkward pity. "Do you have another form of payment?" he asked. The color drained from my mother's face. The triumphant glow was instantly replaced by cold, paralyzing terror. She fumbled through her clutch, producing a different card, one she shared with my father. The coordinator inserted it into the terminal. Declined. The silence at their table deepened, creating a vacuum that quickly drew the attention of the surrounding guests. The rival socialite sitting one table over leaned in, her eyes wide with predatory delight. Whispers ignited like dry kindling. The wealthy elite of Aspen are notoriously unforgiving. They tolerate arrogance, but they despise poverty. My father stood up, his face flushed with panicked anger. He attempted to salvage the situation with bluster. "There must be a system outage with our bank," he announced loudly, trying to project authority. "I will call my wealth manager in the morning and wire the funds directly to the charity foundation." The coordinator shook his head, adhering to the strict rules of the event. "I am very sorry, sir, but the auction rules stipulate that the item goes to the runner-up if the primary payment fails to clear." The coordinator turned away and walked directly to the rival socialite, who gladly produced a working card to claim the painting. The humiliation was profound and undeniable. My mother sat frozen in her chair, staring blankly at the empty space on the table. Charlotte looked at Preston silently, begging for him to intervene, but Preston just stared back with an expression of pure, unadulterated disgust. The financial rot he had suspected was now on public display. "We are leaving," my father hissed, grabbing my mother by the elbow and hauling her to her feet. They did not say goodbye to anyone. They kept their heads down and marched out of the ballroom, enduring the searing heat of 100 judgmental stares. The whispers followed them down the hallway, tearing their fabricated reputation into shreds. They hurried through the main lobby and burst out through the front doors, desperate to escape into the cold night air and retreat to the safety of their chalet. My father handed his claim ticket to the head valet. "Bring the cars around immediately," he ordered, his voice shaking with residual adrenaline. The head valet looked at the ticket, then looked up at my father with a deeply uncomfortable expression. "Sir, I cannot do that." "What do you mean you cannot do that?" my father shouted, stepping forward aggressively. "Go fetch my vehicle." The valet took a step back, gesturing vaguely toward the empty overflow lot. "The vehicles are no longer on the premises." A recovery agency arrived with 2 tow trucks during the appetizer service. They presented the legal repossession orders from your lenders. We had no choice but to surrender the keys. They took both cars. The words struck my family like a physical blow. Years ago, unable to secure traditional financing, my father had signed a subprime lease contract with a high-risk lender to acquire those luxury vehicles. The predatory contract included a zero-tolerance policy for delinquency. Once my secret financial shield was removed, the lender did not hesitate. They tracked the cars via satellite and repossessed them in front of the entire club staff. My family stood stranded on the freezing pavement. They had no cars. They had no credit. They had to endure the ultimate indignity of requesting a standard rideshare vehicle standing in the bitter cold for 20 minutes, while the valet attendants pretended not to notice their spectacular downfall. The social execution was swift and total. The next morning, the Aspen elite turned their backs with chilling efficiency. My mother attempted to call her friends to explain the situation, blaming banking errors and stolen identities, but every single call went straight to voicemail. Text messages were left unread. The upcoming invitations to holiday parties and exclusive luncheons were quietly revoked. They became pariahs overnight, exiled from the only world they cared about. Trapped inside their rented chalet, surrounded by the silence of their ruined social lives, the panic gave way to a dark, unhinged delusion. They refused to accept that their own actions had caused this destruction. They needed a scapegoat, and they focused all their remaining energy entirely on me. Their twisted logic was fueled by a letter that arrived in their mailbox 2 days later. It was a formal notice from the corporate banking provider stating that the $40,000 charge to the French Polynesia resort had been flagged as an unauthorized transaction and was currently under dispute. My family misread the situation entirely. They did not understand the severe legal mechanisms of a corporate fraud investigation. They assumed I had simply called customer service and filed a standard chargeback out of spite. They believed that the transaction was merely paused pending my verbal authorization. They concluded that if they could just confront me face to face, if they could corner me in public and apply enough pressure, they could force me to call the bank and drop the dispute. They believed that securing the Bora Bora trip was the magical key to salvaging their reputation, appeasing Preston, and restoring their place in society. They knew I would never agree to meet with them voluntarily. They needed to trap me in a location where I could not easily escape, surrounded by the elite clients I was sworn to protect. They needed an environment where the threat of a public screaming match would compel me to surrender. They turned their attention to the upcoming Winter Solstice Gala. It was the most exclusive, high-security event of the season, a gathering of billionaires and industry titans. They knew I was the primary logistics architect for the gala, tasked with managing the VIP guests. They also knew they were strictly banned from the guest list. Desperation breeds severe audacity. My father reached out to a shady contact he knew from his fading country club days, a man who managed temporary staffing for local catering companies. Using the last few $100s of cash they had hidden in a drawer, they purchased 3 forged vendor identification badges. They formulated a hostile plan. They would infiltrate the gala disguised as event staff, navigate through the heavy security perimeter, and corner me on the ballroom floor. They were preparing to risk everything on one final explosive confrontation, blissfully unaware that they were marching straight toward a trap I had already engineered, and that the federal authorities were waiting at the finish line. My family spent their final days taping forged catering passes to cheap plastic lanyards, convincing themselves they were executing a brilliant tactical maneuver. They operated under the assumption that the primary conflict revolved around a stolen corporate credit card and a canceled tropical vacation. Their perspective was incredibly narrow, blinded by their own desperation and entitlement. While they huddled in their freezing rented chalet plotting a public screaming match, I was sitting in my climate-controlled office in Denver, engineering a financial masterstroke that would permanently rewrite the hierarchy of our lives. For a decade, I had endured their relentless mockery regarding my unglamorous office labor. Charlotte loved to parade her designer winter gear purchased on my father's failing credit lines, while I wore sensible corporate attire. What my parents and my sister consistently failed to understand is the highly lucrative nature of elite itinerary architecture. When you orchestrate a month-long private safari for an international tech mogul, or secure an exclusive island buyout for a European dignitary, the commission structure is astronomical. I never flaunted those earnings. I lived in a modest downtown apartment and drove a reliable, paid-off vehicle. I quietly funneled every single commission check into diversified holding accounts, high-yield investments, and commercial real estate trusts. By the time I reached my late 20s, I possessed the exact caliber of liquid capital my parents spent their entire adult lives pretending to wield. My agency relies on a sophisticated intelligence network to monitor global banking trends. This system ensures our elite clients are not booking luxury resorts backed by unstable financial institutions. A specific automated alert crossed my secure monitor late one afternoon. A prominent regional bank was quietly liquidating a massive portfolio of distressed residential debt in the Colorado Mountain region. I recognized the banking institution instantly. It was the exact same lender holding the predatory subprime mortgage on my parents' rented Aspen chalet. Distressed residential debt indicates that the borrower has missed multiple consecutive payments, placing the physical asset in a state of pre-foreclosure. The bank was desperate to clear these toxic non-performing loans off their balance sheets before the fiscal quarter closed. They were bundling the bad mortgages and selling them to institutional investors to recoup a fraction of their losses. I did not hesitate. I contacted my lead corporate attorney in Denver. Within 48 hours, we established a blind, limited liability company registered in the state of Delaware. This specific legal structure provided an impenetrable layer of anonymity. To the outside world, my new company was just another faceless corporate entity specializing in debt acquisition. I instructed my attorney to submit an aggressive all-cash bid for the Aspen portfolio. Because the regional bank was facing severe regulatory pressure to dump the bad loans, they accepted the offer immediately. My blind company purchased the entire debt package for pennies on the dollar. The ink dried on the digital contracts, the wire transfers cleared the Federal Reserve. Sitting alone in my glass-walled sanctuary, the staggering implication of the purchase settled over me. I was no longer just the estranged, ungrateful daughter they could banish from their lives. I was the primary lien holder. I held the deed to the property. I owned the vaulted ceilings, the mahogany dining table where my mother had issued her ultimatum, and the artificial gas fireplace they were currently huddled around. My family was physically living inside my personal asset. The people who had threatened to cast me out into the cold were now entirely dependent on my mercy to keep a roof over their heads. I possessed zero mercy. They had weaponized my sense of familial duty for years, draining my savings and treating me like a disposable commodity. Now the geometric logic of justice was completing its shape. I directed my legal team to draft the formal eviction notices. I printed the documents on thick, heavy stock paper. I picked up my favorite fountain pen, smoothed the pages flat against my mahogany desk, and signed my name at the bottom of the legal decree. The signature was clean, precise, and devoid of any hesitation. I possessed the legal authority to execute the eviction immediately. I could have sent the local authorities to the property that very afternoon, forcing them out into the snow while the neighbors watched. But I wanted the timing to reflect the poetic nature of their downfall. I wanted the illusion of their rugged luxury to shatter at the exact moment they believed they were regaining control. I contacted the county sheriff's department. I paid the required expedited processing fees and scheduled the deputies to serve the eviction order on a very specific date and time. I timed it for the exact evening of the Winter Solstice Gala. The Winter Solstice Gala is the undisputed crown jewel of the Aspen social calendar. It takes place at a sprawling private estate that is transformed into a literal winter wonderland. The guest list is a curated selection of billionaires, industry titans, and celebrities. The security perimeter is tighter than a major commercial airport. I was attending the event in my official professional capacity as a logistics architect tasked with managing the VIP arrivals and ensuring the security protocols remained flawless for my highest-paying clients. My family, armed with their stolen administrative credentials and forged vendor badges, was planning to sneak through the service entrance to ambush me. They were preparing to risk their freedom on one final, desperate confrontation on the glittering ballroom floor. Their logic was twisted by sheer panic. They believed that if they caused a massive scene in front of my elite network, the threat of professional embarrassment would force me to surrender. They thought they could compel me to drop the federal wire fraud charges, authorize the $85,000 Bora Bora honeymoon, and salvage Charlotte's doomed engagement to Preston. They were hurtling toward the glittering ice of Aspen's biggest night, entirely unaware that the ground beneath them had already vanished. They were marching into battle to save a fabricated reputation, blissfully ignorant of the fact that when the gala ended, their keys would no longer open their front door. The pressure cooker was sealed tight, and the heat was rising to an unbearable degree. Preston was attending the gala as well, waiting to see if Charlotte could produce the luxury itinerary he demanded. The Federal Cybercrime Division was finalizing their warrants based on the digital evidence I had provided. The county sheriffs were preparing to deliver the eviction notices. Every single consequence of their greed, their cruelty, and their entitlement was converging on a single glass-enclosed balcony overlooking the snow-capped mountains. The two opposing forces were locked onto an inescapable collision course. My family thought they were setting a trap for me, but they were actually walking directly into an execution chamber I had spent weeks designing. The resulting impact would leave nothing but ashes in its wake, and I was fully prepared to watch their fake empire burn to the ground. The Winter Solstice Gala was not simply a social event. It was a concentrated display of global financial dominance. Held at a sprawling private estate carved directly into the side of the mountain, the venue was a sensory overload of extreme, unapologetic opulence. Towering ice sculptures of mythical creatures flanked the grand entrance, catching the ambient light and fracturing it into a million glittering prisms. Waiters wearing immaculate white gloves carried silver trays loaded with imported beluga caviar and glasses of vintage champagne. The air inside the ballroom carried the heavy, intoxicating scent of fresh pine needles, mixed with custom-blended perfumes that cost more than a standard mortgage payment. I stood near the center of the grand ballroom wearing a floor-length gown of midnight blue silk. The fabric draped perfectly, projecting an aura of quiet, untouchable authority. I was not there to socialize or drink with the guests. I was attending the gala in my official capacity as the lead logistics architect. I was personally overseeing the security and comfort of 5 different billionaires who had trusted my agency with their presence. I held an encrypted tablet coordinating discrete security movements and monitoring flight schedules for private helicopter departures. I was entirely in my element, operating seamlessly within the exact echelon of power my family had spent their entire lives pretending to belong to. My peripheral vision caught a jarring disruption in the smooth, elegant flow of the room. Near the service entrance, a cluster of catering staff parted awkwardly. 3 figures pushed their way into the ballroom, sticking out like jagged rocks in a calm stream. It was my mother, my father, and Charlotte. They had actually done it. They had used forged vendor passes attached to cheap plastic lanyards to bypass the outer security perimeter. The contrast between my family and the authentic wealth of the room was stark and immediate. My mother wore an old designer gown from 5 seasons ago, the fabric looking tired and dated under the brilliant chandeliers. My father wore a tuxedo that no longer fit his slumping posture, his tie slightly crooked. Charlotte looked entirely manic, her eyes darting around the room in absolute terror. They radiated a frantic, desperate energy. They looked like starving predators who had just stumbled into a gilded cage, completely unaware that they were the ones being hunted. I did not alert the guards immediately. I wanted this confrontation to happen precisely where I had planned it. I turned my back to them and began walking at a measured, deliberate pace through the glittering crowd. I stopped to offer a warm smile and a handshake to a prominent senator. I exchanged pleasantries with a real estate titan, ensuring my clients saw me operating with absolute control. All the while, I could feel the hostile gaze of my family burning into my back. They were stalking me through the ballroom, weaving past diamonds and silk, driven by the singular delusional belief that they could still bend me to their will. I guided the pursuit away from the main floor, steering them toward the isolated western wing of the estate. The music from the live orchestra grew fainter with every step. I approached a set of heavy double-glass doors that led out onto a sprawling observation balcony. The balcony was suspended over the edge of the mountain, offering a breathtaking, dizzying view of the snow-capped peaks and the tiny glowing lights of the village far below. I pushed the doors open and stepped out into the freezing night air. The doors had barely clicked shut behind me when they burst open again. My family flooded onto the balcony, moving with a feral, uncoordinated aggression. My father immediately stepped to the left, using his body to block the exit back into the warmth of the estate. My mother marched directly toward me, her face contorted into a mask of pure, unadulterated malice. Charlotte trailed behind them, shivering violently in the biting cold, her arms wrapped tightly around her chest. We had circled all the way back to the exact moment my story began. The freezing, glass-enclosed balcony, the distant sound of police sirens winding their way up the mountain roads, the final, desperate stand of a ruined empire. "You are going to fix this right now," my mother hissed. Her voice was a venomous whisper, barely contained by her trembling jaw. "You are going to pull out your phone, call your corporate bank, and authorize Charlotte's $85,000 honeymoon." I turned to face her, the cold wind whipping the hem of my silk dress around my ankles. I took a slow sip of my champagne, letting the silence stretch between us. "I am not calling anyone," I said. My mother closed the distance between us, her eyes wide with a manic, terrifying intensity. "If you do not make that call," she threatened, pointing a shaking finger directly at my face, "I will walk right back into that ballroom and scream at the top of my lungs. I will tell every single billionaire in there that you are a thief. I will cause a scene so massive it will permanently destroy your agency. You will never work in this industry again." "Please," Stella Charlotte wailed, dropping any remaining pretense of superiority. Her voice cracked, dissolving into pathetic, genuine sobs. "Preston is inside. He gave me a deadline. He is waiting for me to show him the VIP confirmation codes. If I go back in there empty-handed, he is going to leave me. My entire life will be over. You cannot do this to me. I am your sister." I looked at Charlotte. The dramatic irony was almost suffocating. She was begging me to save a relationship that was entirely transactional, mourning the loss of a life she never actually possessed. She was completely oblivious to the fact that the federal authorities were already moving against her for wire fraud, and her only concern was losing her wealthy fiancé. My father stepped forward, his heavy boots echoing against the frosted glass floor. He did not speak. He just moved toward me with a dark, threatening momentum. He used his physical bulk to back me up against the transparent railing. The sheer drop of the mountain loomed just inches behind my spine. The physical intimidation was a calculated tactic designed to trigger the obedience they had conditioned into me since childhood. They wanted me to feel trapped, small, and entirely powerless. The sheer panic of the impending collapse finally broke my mother's legs. The adrenaline faded, leaving only raw terror. She dropped to her knees on the freezing floor. Her mascara ran down her cheeks in dark, jagged lines. She clawed at the fabric of my dress, weeping hysterically, begging for mercy, while simultaneously trying to extort me. "We are your family," she cried out, her voice echoing into the dark mountain sky. "You have to fix this." The pressure cooker was now completely sealed. The temperature had reached the absolute maximum limit. My father stood inches away, his fists clenched, fully prepared to resort to violence to save his fabricated reputation. My mother sobbed at my feet, a pathetic display of ruined pride and toxic entitlement. Charlotte hyperventilated against the glass doors, watching her world dissolve into vapor. They were holding their breath, waiting for the explosion. They were absolutely certain that their combined terror, their threats of public humiliation, and their physical intimidation would finally force me to break. They believed I was backed into a corner with no escape. They had no idea that I was not trapped on that balcony with them. They were trapped on that balcony with me, and I was holding the detonator to their entire existence. I stood with my spine pressed against the freezing, transparent barrier of the observation balcony. The sheer drop to the dark valley floor loomed just inches behind me, yet I felt no vertigo. My mother continued to weep at my feet, her tears freezing against the polished floorboards. My father leaned in closer, attempting to use his physical size to force my submission. He expected me to crumble under the weight of his intimidation. He expected me to reach into my clutch, retrieve my encrypted phone, and reverse the financial freeze. Instead, I maintained my eye contact with him, raised my right hand, and delivered a subtle, deliberate nod toward the dark perimeter of the terrace. The heavy glass doors slid open, but it was not Preston or another wealthy guest stepping out to interrupt our family dispute. The private corporate guards I had stationed in the shadows moved forward in unison. They were flanked by 3 uniformed local police officers and 2 individuals wearing plain dark windbreakers bearing federal insignias. The sudden presence of law enforcement instantly shattered the manufactured dominance my father was trying to project. He stumbled backward, his hands instinctively rising in a defensive posture, his face going pale in the cold mountain air. "What is the meaning of this?" my father demanded, his voice cracking under the sudden strain. He looked frantically at the officers, trying to summon his usual arrogant bluster. "You cannot just storm out here and interrupt us. We are prominent guests of this gala." I stepped away from the railing, smoothing the silk of my midnight blue gown. "I am not authorizing anything tonight," I said, my voice cutting through the crisp wind like a diamond blade. "The transaction you attempted to force through my corporate portal was not a simple family loan. You stole my administrative credentials from a secure bank vault. You used an encrypted network to authorize an illicit international wire transfer. That is not a minor disagreement over a wedding budget. That is felony wire fraud and identity theft." I turned my gaze to my sister. Charlotte stood paralyzed near the glass doors, her mouth opening and closing silently as her mind struggled to process the severity of her actions. "Did you truly think you could log into an elite travel system from our parents' residential router and leave no trace?" I asked her. "The digital logs, the precise IP address matching your location, and the time-stamped photograph you posted boasting about the reservation were compiled and sent to the federal prosecutor days ago. I let the transaction clear just enough to trigger the interstate commerce laws. You handed the authorities a perfect, undeniable confession." The 2 federal agents stepped past my father, ignoring his sputtering protests. They approached Charlotte, who shrank back against the frosted glass pane. "Miss Susan," one of the agents stated in a flat, clinical tone, "you are being placed under arrest for suspicion of wire fraud and unauthorized access to a protected financial system. Please turn around and place your hands behind your back." As the cold metal cuffs clicked securely around her wrists, a guttural shriek tore from my sister's throat. She began thrashing fiercely against the officers, begging our parents to wake her up from this nightmare. She screamed for Preston, desperate for her wealthy fiancé to emerge from the ballroom and shield her from the consequences of her own entitlement. The heavy, soundproof glass muffled her cries, ensuring the elite guests inside the gala remained undisturbed by her downfall. The sight of his favorite daughter in handcuffs finally activated my father's deepest delusions. He could not process the reality of the situation. He stepped into the path of the arresting officers, his chest puffed out, attempting to weaponize a social standing that no longer existed. "Do you have any idea who I am?" he shouted, his face turning a dangerous shade of crimson. "I am Richard Susan. We are prominent members of this community. We own a multi-million-dollar estate in this town. You are making a catastrophic mistake. I will have your badges for this outrage. I will sue this entire department, and I will sue my ungrateful daughter for defamation." The officers did not even flinch, treating his threats like the empty noise of a desperate man. I held up a hand, signaling for a brief pause in the proceedings. The chief of my private security detail stepped forward, carrying a sleek, dark manila envelope. He handed it to me with a respectful nod. I walked over to my father, who was still breathing heavily, radiating a toxic mixture of panic and false pride. "You are not going to sue anyone, Dad," I said quietly, ensuring my words carried the weight of inescapable truth. "And you certainly do not own a multi-million-dollar estate." I extended my arm and pressed the thick folder directly into his chest. He took it automatically, his hands trembling as he opened the flap. Inside were crisp, notarized legal documents bearing the official seal of the county clerk. I watched his eyes dart across the pages, struggling to comprehend the dense financial terminology and the bold signatures at the bottom. Let me summarize it for you. I offered maintaining my icy composure while he stared at the paperwork. Your regional lender was liquidating a vast portfolio of distressed residential debt to clear their ledgers before the fiscal quarter ended. They bundled your defaulted mortgage into that package. My newly formed limited liability company purchased that exact portfolio on Tuesday. I used the commissions from my unglamorous office labor to buy your debt for pennies on the dollar. He looked up from the papers, the color draining from his face so fast he appeared hollow. His mouth moved, but no sound emerged. The arrogant patriarch was finally silenced by the sheer magnitude of his own failure. "I own the debt," I explained, enunciating every single syllable so the truth could penetrate his deep delusion. "I hold the deed. My corporate entity is the sole proprietor of the luxury chalet you have been using as a stage to pretend you are wealthy. You do not own a single piece of property in this town. You are merely delinquent tenants living inside my personal asset." My mother, still kneeling on the freezing floorboards, let out a whimpering gasp. She looked up at me with wide, terrified eyes, the expensive fabric of her gown pooling around her in a pathetic display of ruined prestige. "What does that mean?" she whispered, her voice barely audible over the howling wind. "It means the grace period is over," I replied, staring down at the woman who had demanded my total obedience just minutes prior. "My legal team filed the final paperwork this morning. While you were busy sneaking into this gala with forged vendor passes, the county sheriff drove up the mountain. Your formal eviction notices were nailed to your front door an hour ago. The locks have been legally changed. Your belongings will be placed in a storage facility pending the settlement of your outstanding debts. You are officially homeless." The realization hit the three of them with the devastating force of a winter avalanche. The grand illusion they had spent a decade cultivating was vaporized in an instant. They had sacrificed their morality, alienated their responsible daughter, and committed federal crimes just to maintain a fragile country club image. Their relentless obsession with rugged luxury, their calculated cruelty, and their insatiable greed had led them directly to total destitution. And I, the daughter they dismissed as a lowly office worker, stood before them as the sole architect of their ruin. My name is Stella Susan, and I am 29 years old. 3 weeks ago, I found myself standing on an ice-cold glass balcony overlooking the snow-capped mountains of Aspen. Police sirens echoed through the freezing night air, cutting through the faint music of the winter solstice gala inside. At my feet, wearing a sequined designer gown she paid for with a maxed-out credit line, was my mother. She was on her knees. Her mascara was smeared, and she was clawing at the hem of my dress, sobbing heavily. "Please, Stella," she wept, her voice cracking in front of half the town's elite. "We are your family. You have to fix this." I did not step back. I did not reach out to comfort her. I just took a slow sip of my vintage champagne, let the crisp finish settle, and looked down at the woman who had spent my entire adult life treating me like a personal ATM. "I gave you 72 hours, I told her. My voice was calm, carrying no anger, just the icy reality she refused to accept. You see, my parents are the poster children for Aspen's toxic, rugged luxury culture. They are obsessed with private ski clubs, designer winter gear, and projecting an image of effortless wealth. But their entire empire is a house of cards built on predatory loans. They worship my younger sister Charlotte, a shallow social climber who constantly mocks my quiet corporate career. They think I just do unglamorous office labor. They think I am a glorified customer service rep. What none of them realized is that I am an elite global itinerary architect. I design multi-million-dollar travel experiences for ultra-high net worth individuals. I command a network of private jets, island buyouts, and exclusive concierge services. I hold immense professional power in the very luxury circles they are so desperate to impress. So when they arrogantly backed me into a corner and ordered me to fund Charlotte's $85,000 honeymoon to Bora Bora, threatening to disown me if I refused, they thought I would cave. They thought I would open my wallet, like I always did, to save their precious social standing. They had no idea they were forcing my hand to trigger a financial avalanche that would bury them all. Before I tell you exactly what happened when I walked out of their chalet that night and made the phone call that ended their fake lives, please take a moment to like and subscribe to Morning Revenge, but only if this story speaks to you. Drop your age and where you are listening from in the comments. Here is how 3 days changed my life forever. It started on a Tuesday evening inside my parents' rented luxury chalet. The heat in the living room felt suffocating. A grand gas-powered fireplace dominated the far wall. The ceramic logs burned with a synthetic perfection that provided heat without any messy ash. It was a perfect symbol for my family, an expensive and carefully controlled fake. I sat on the edge of a leather sofa, exhausted. I had spent the past 14 hours finalizing a private yacht tour across the Mediterranean for a tech mogul. My brain was fried from calculating currency exchanges and offshore logistics. My mother sat across from me, wrapped in a cashmere shawl she definitely could not afford. Without saying a word, she slid a heavy, glossy brochure across the mahogany coffee table. It stopped right in front of my hands. "Bora Bora," my mother said. She tapped a perfectly manicured fingernail against the cover, which featured a sprawling, overwater bungalow surrounded by turquoise water. "Charlotte's wedding is in 3 months. She deserves the finest French Polynesia honeymoon, Stella. You are paying for it. And we want you booking it under your agency's elite tier so she gets the VIP treatment." I looked over at Charlotte. My 25-year-old sister was sprawled out on a velvet chaise lounge. She did not even bother to look up from her phone. "Make sure Preston gets the private helicopter transfer from the airport," Charlotte muttered, scrolling lazily. "Do not book the shared boat, Stella. It is so tacky. Preston's family would judge us." Preston was her fiancé, a man whose entire personality was wrapped up in trust funds and superficial appearances. I picked up the brochure. I did not need to read the fine print to know the cost. The projected total was printed right on the bottom corner. $85,000. I set the brochure back down and aligned it with the edge of the table. "I can secure a vendor discount for you," I said, keeping my tone professional, "but I need the deposit transferred from Dad's account by Thursday morning to hold the reservation." My father let out a short, dismissive laugh from his armchair. He took a sip of a vintage bourbon he had bought on credit. "Do not be difficult, Stella. You know our liquidity is tied up in the country club renewals right now. Just run it through your corporate account. You expense these things all the time." I stared at him. "I expense client trips, Dad. Clients who pay the firm back. I am a travel architect, not your personal bank. I am not paying for a vacation that costs as much as a house down payment." My mother's expression hardened. The polite high society mask slipped right off her face, revealing the calculating greed beneath. "You will book this trip, Stella. You will pay for it. If you refuse to support your own sister for her wedding, if you embarrass us in front of Preston's family, you are no longer part of this family." The room went dead silent. The only sound was the artificial hiss of the gas fire. The ultimatum hung in the air. This was their favorite tactic. They had used it to drain my savings since I was 18 years old. Pay up or be cast out. I looked at the three people who had used me as a financial shield for years. I felt a cold detachment settle deep in my chest. I stood up and slung my coat over my arm. "No," I said. My mother's jaw dropped. "Excuse me?" I said no. I turned and walked toward the entryway. "Wait right there," my mother snapped. She stood up so fast she nearly knocked over her wine glass. "If you are going to turn your back on us, give me the spare safety deposit box key, the one with the family insurance documents. You have no right to hold on to it if you are not going to be part of this family." I paused at the door. I did not care about the safety deposit box. My mother and I had co-signed it years ago for emergencies. I reached into my purse, pulled out the small brass key, and tossed it onto the mahogany table. It landed next to the Bora Bora brochure with a sharp clatter. I walked out into the freezing night. I had no idea that by handing over that key, I had just given Charlotte the exact tool she needed to commit federal wire fraud. The heavy silence on the balcony was profound. The howling mountain wind seemed to fade into the background, leaving only the ragged, panicked breathing of the three people standing before me. My father stared down at the manila folder in his hands, his eyes scanning the eviction notices over and over again, unable to process the permanent destruction of his fake empire. My mother remained on her knees, the freezing floorboards biting into her bare skin through her torn designer gown. Charlotte was trembling in the grip of the federal agents, the cold metal handcuffs locking her wrists together. Just as the reality of their destitution settled over the group, the heavy glass doors leading back into the grand ballroom slid open one more time. The warm golden light from the chandeliers spilled out onto the dark terrace, accompanied by the faint, elegant melody of the string quartet playing inside. A tall figure stepped through the threshold, his silhouette framed by the brilliance of the gala. It was Preston. He wore a bespoke tuxedo that fit his frame with perfect precision, a physical manifestation of the old money heritage he wielded like a weapon. Preston had grown impatient waiting near the ice sculptures. He had ventured out to find his future bride, expecting to receive the VIP confirmation codes for their tropical honeymoon. Instead, he stepped directly into an active crime scene. Preston stopped walking. His sharp, calculating eyes scanned the balcony, absorbing the chaos with chilling speed. He saw the local police officers standing near the railing. He saw the federal agents securing the restraints on his weeping fiancée. He saw the patriarch of the family he was supposed to marry into, slouched over a stack of legal foreclosure documents, looking like a defeated, broken shell of a man. Charlotte noticed him immediately. Her head snapped up, her tear-streaked face twisting into a mask of desperate hope. "Preston," she sobbed, her voice echoing in the cold night air. "Tell them to stop. Tell them there is a misunderstanding. Stella is just trying to ruin our wedding. You have to call your family lawyers and make them fix this." Preston did not rush to her side. He did not demand answers from the officers or wrap his coat around her shivering shoulders. He stood perfectly still, his predatory instincts processing the exact nature of the disaster unfolding in front of him. He looked at the federal windbreakers. He looked at the legal documents clutched in my father's shaking hands. The federal agent reading the Miranda rights paused, glancing at the newcomer. Miss Susan is being taken into federal custody for wire fraud and identity theft, the agent stated, addressing Preston with a flat, professional tone. I suggest you step back, sir. The pieces of the puzzle clicked together in Preston's mind. The declined credit card at the ski club was not a banking error. The rumors of insolvency were true. The magnificent $85,000 vacation to French Polynesia was a stolen fantasy funded by a felony. The Susan family possessed no wealth, no inheritance, and no future. They were a financial black hole, and Charlotte was the anchor that was about to drag his pristine family name into a highly publicized criminal scandal. The double cross he had been planning for weeks was no longer necessary. He did not need to wait until after the tropical vacation to abandon her. The illusion was dead, and his exit strategy was laid bare right in front of him. Preston took 2 slow steps toward Charlotte. The sheer disgust radiating from his posture was palpable. He looked at her not as a partner or a lover, but as a toxic liability he was about to discard. There is no Bora Bora trip, Preston said. His voice was remarkably calm, carrying a cruel, indifferent clarity. There is no trust fund, and there is no inheritance. You are bankrupt. You are a felon. Charlotte shook her head frantically, her blonde hair whipping across her face in the bitter wind. No, she pleaded, straining against the grip of the federal agents. We can fix it. I did this for us, Preston. I did it because your family demanded perfection. Please do not leave me here. You did this because you are desperate, Preston corrected her, his tone dropping to a sharp, unforgiving register. My family demands perfection, yes, but we also demand authenticity. We do not marry criminals, and we certainly do not associate with poverty. You lied to me from the very beginning. Preston reached down to his left hand. With a smooth, practiced motion, he grasped the custom platinum engagement ring he had placed on her finger just a few months prior. It was a flawless 3-carat diamond, a symbol of the elite echelon she had sacrificed her own sister to reach. Because her hands were bound behind her back, she could not stop him. He slid the ring off her freezing finger. He held the diamond up to the light for a brief second, inspecting it, as if ensuring the stone had not been tainted by her touch. Then, without a single ounce of hesitation or remorse, he opened his hand. The ring dropped. It hit the icy floorboards with a sharp, high-pitched clink. It rolled a few inches before coming to a rest near the hem of my mother's ruined gown. The engagement is terminated, Preston announced. He did not wait for a response. He turned on his heel, adjusted the cuffs of his tuxedo, and walked back through the glass doors, disappearing into the warmth and luxury of the ballroom without ever casting a backward glance. The sound of the doors clicking shut severed the final tether holding Charlotte to reality. She collapsed entirely. Her knees buckled and she sagged against the federal agents, weeping with a guttural, hollow agony that echoed off the mountain peaks. She was not crying out of remorse for the crime she committed. She was mourning the permanent loss of her social status. The shiny, superficial world she craved had just rejected her in the most humiliating manner possible. The agents hoisted her back to her feet, holding her firmly by the arms, and began guiding her toward the service elevator that would take her down to the waiting squad cars. My father stood paralyzed against the glass railing. The arrogant patriarch, the man who believed his leased vehicles and country club memberships made him a king, was entirely shattered. The eviction notices slipped from his numb fingers, the pages scattering across the freezing deck, fluttering away into the darkness. He had no words left. His lazy sense of superiority was permanently erased, replaced by the terrifying realization that he had nowhere to go and nobody left to manipulate. My mother remained on the floor. She crawled forward on her hands and knees, ignoring the biting cold. She reached out with trembling hands, her fingers grasping at the fabric of my dark blue gown. Her face was a portrait of sheer devastation. "Stella," she sobbed, her voice a fragile, broken rasp. "Please, you have your revenge. You proved your point. Just call the bank. Tell the police it was a misunderstanding. Give us the house back. We have nothing left. We are your family. have mercy on us." I looked down at the woman who had spent a decade treating me like a disposable asset. I looked at the father who had traded my financial future for a luxury vehicle. I listened to the fading cries of the sister who had committed a federal crime just to prove she was better than me. I felt no anger. I felt no pity. I felt an absolute, chilling indifference. The emotional chains they had wrapped around my neck for so long were finally broken, leaving behind a profound sense of clarity. "Family does not extort family," I said. My voice was quiet, yet it carried over the howling wind with inescapable finality. "You told me 3 weeks ago that if I did not fund your delusions, I would be cut off. You made your terms very clear." I took a step back, forcing her hands to slip off my dress. "You wanted to cut me off," I told her. "Consider it done." I turned my back on the ruins of their empire. I walked toward the heavy glass doors, pulling my silk shawl tighter around my shoulders. The security guards parted to let me through, leaving the police to deal with the weeping matriarch and the paralyzed father. I pushed the doors open and stepped off the freezing balcony, leaving them to face the bitter winter night. The warm air of the grand ballroom washed over me, carrying the scent of expensive perfume and the sound of elegant music. I joined the glittering crowd, blending seamlessly into the world I had earned, leaving the cold, desolate reality of my former family far behind. The justice system moves with a cold and methodical precision. In the weeks following the Winter Solstice Gala, the fallout from the canceled honeymoon and the stolen corporate credentials settled into permanent reality. Charlotte did not go to a federal penitentiary. Her defense attorney managed to negotiate a strict plea deal with the prosecutors, leveraging her lack of prior criminal history. She avoided a prison sentence, but the leniency ended there. The presiding judge handed down a crushing financial penalty, ordering her to pay full restitution for the investigative costs, alongside severe federal fines. She was placed on supervised probation for 5 years. More importantly, the judge mandated 500 hours of manual community service. Given her specific skill set and the nature of her crime, the probation office assigned her to a public works program that partnered with local businesses to provide maintenance labor. Charlotte was assigned to the Aspen Peak Ski Club, the exact institution where she used to sit in the mahogany lounge, sipping hot toddies and mocking the service staff, became her daily prison. Her uniform was no longer a designer winter coat and imported leather boots. She was issued a high-visibility orange safety vest, standard work gloves, and a heavy metal ice scraper. Her shift started at 5 in the morning, long before the sun crested the mountain peaks, when the air was so cold it burned the lungs. Her primary duty was maintaining the sprawling valet parking lot. She spent her days scraping thick layers of ice off the asphalt, clearing the walkways, and hauling bags of melting salt. The physical labor was grueling, leaving her hands blistered and her muscles aching. But the true punishment was the psychological toll. As the winter season progressed, the elite members of the club arrived in their luxury vehicles. Charlotte had to stand off to the side, leaning on her shovel, while the valet attendants rushed to open the doors for the wealthy guests. These were the exact same people who had attended her engagement parties. These were the women she used to brag to about her upgraded tropical vacations and her billionaire fiancé. Now, they drove past her without a second glance. A few of her former bridesmaids recognized her standing in the freezing slush wearing her bright orange vest. They did not roll down their windows to offer sympathy. They averted their eyes, embarrassed by her presence, pretending she was entirely invisible. Charlotte learned the harsh truth about the society she had sacrificed everything to impress. They did not care about her. They never had. Stripped of her fabricated wealth and her prominent engagement, she was just another anonymous laborer working in the cold. My parents experienced a different kind of exile. The morning after the gala, the county sheriff arrived at the luxury chalet to enforce the eviction notice. My father and mother were given exactly 2 hours to gather their personal belongings. They packed whatever clothing and cheap trinkets they could fit into plastic storage bins, leaving behind the heavy mahogany furniture and the imported rugs that actually belonged to the property estate. With their credit scores ruined and their bank accounts frozen, they could not secure a lease anywhere near the mountain village. They were forced to relocate to a cramped, low-income apartment complex on the industrial outskirts of a neighboring town, miles away from the ski resorts and the country clubs. Their new reality was a stark departure from the vaulted ceilings and the artificial gas fireplaces they were accustomed to. The apartment featured peeling linoleum floors, thin walls, and a rattling heating unit that barely kept the winter chill at bay. The grand dining table where my mother used to issue her ultimatums was replaced by a scratched laminate counter. They sat in the dim light of a single fluorescent bulb, waiting for their phones to ring. They waited for their wealthy friends to reach out for their country club peers, to offer a loan or a word of comfort. The phones remained silent. The rugged luxury elite operate with a ruthless social Darwinism. Poverty is treated like a contagious disease. My parents were quietly and permanently erased from the guest lists, the charity boards and the holiday galas. The invitations evaporated. The society pages forgot their names. They were left with nothing but the crushing weight of their debts and the echoing silence of their tiny apartment, forced to spend the rest of their lives reflecting on the arrogance that brought them there. While they settled into their desolate new reality, I went to work. I did not purchase the Aspen Chalet out of simple spite. I am an itinerary architect, and I recognize a prime real estate asset when I see one. The property was situated in one of the most desirable locations in the region, boasting panoramic views and immediate access to the exclusive ski trails. I hired a premier contracting firm to gut the interior. We removed the tired, fake rustic decor my parents had favored and installed sleek, modern finishes. We upgraded the security systems, brought in custom contemporary furniture, and transformed the property into a highly lucrative short-term corporate rental. I added the chalet to my agency's exclusive portfolio. I began leasing the property to the ultra-wealthy clients I managed, charging premium nightly rates for tech CEOs, international diplomats, and venture capitalists seeking a private winter retreat. The demand was immediate and overwhelming. The property generated a staggering revenue stream, paying off the initial debt acquisition within the first operating season. The poetic justice of the business maneuver was profound. The very house that used to drain my savings, the structure my family used as a stage to belittle my career and extort my income, was now a high-yielding asset padding my corporate accounts. I turned the site of my deepest financial trauma into an engine of relentless profit. With the legal chaos resolved, the property generating steady income, and my toxic family permanently excised from my life, I decided it was time to close out the final, lingering detail of this entire ordeal. I logged into my global reservation system and pulled up the original booking that had started the war. I packed a single piece of lightweight luggage, boarded a first-class commercial flight out of Denver, and traveled halfway across the globe. I stepped off a private transport boat and walked onto a wooden dock bathed in brilliant, blinding sunshine. The air was thick with the scent of salt water and blooming hibiscus. The crystal-clear turquoise water of the lagoon stretched out in every direction, meeting the endless blue horizon. A concierge greeted me with a warm smile, handed me a chilled towel, and escorted me down the long wooden boardwalk. We stopped in front of the premium VIP overwater bungalow. It was the exact same unit I had originally booked for my sister's honeymoon, the one she had tried to steal using my corporate credentials. I stepped inside the suite. It was a masterpiece of tropical luxury. The king-size bed faced a wall of retractable glass doors that opened directly onto a private sun deck. A section of the hardwood floor was made of reinforced glass, allowing me to watch the vibrant tropical fish swimming in the warm waters directly below my feet. I walked out onto the wooden deck and sat down on a plush lounge chair. The gentle sound of the waves lapping against the support pillars provided a soothing, rhythmic background noise. A resort attendant appeared a moment later, carrying a silver bucket filled with ice. He retrieved a bottle of vintage champagne, popped the cork with a soft sigh, and poured the pale golden liquid into a crystal flute. He placed the glass on the small table next to me, offered a polite bow, and retreated back down the boardwalk, leaving me entirely alone. I picked up the champagne flute. I felt the cool condensation against my fingertips. I looked out over the vast, empty expanse of the Pacific Ocean. There were no country club expectations here. There were no ultimatums, no screaming arguments, and no desperate attempts to maintain a fake image. The heavy, suffocating pressure I had carried on my shoulders since I was 18 years old was gone. The 2-hour emotional roller coaster that had defined the last chapter of my life finally leveled out, resolving into a perfect, deeply satisfying quiet. I took a slow sip of the champagne. I felt the warm tropical breeze brush against my face. I had spent my entire career designing flawless escapes for other people. I had navigated the treacherous logistics of their wealth and protected them from the chaos of the world. Now, sitting on this sun-drenched deck, I realized I had finally executed the most important project of my life. I had architected my own absolute freedom. The American dream at its core is a promise of upward mobility, a gleaming ideal where hard work yields a prosperous, secure life. But when that dream is filtered through the distorted lens of societal prestige, it can rot the foundation of the very institution it is meant to support, the traditional family. The story of Stella Charlotte and their parents is not merely a sensational tale of stolen corporate cards and luxury evictions. Beneath the shattered ice sculptures of Aspen and the canceled Bora Bora honeymoons lies a profound, haunting lesson about parenting, emotional awareness, and the dark, unexamined side of familial duty. In traditional American culture, the family is revered as our primary sanctuary. Parents are expected to be the architects of their children's moral and emotional frameworks. Yet when we examine the collapse of the Susan family, we see what happens when the architecture of a home is built entirely on the fragile, hollow pillars of image and status. Stella's parents did not view their daughters as independent souls to be nurtured. They viewed them as extensions of their own egos, as assets to be leveraged or liabilities to be managed. This represents the ultimate failure of parental responsibility. True parenting requires an unwavering commitment to honesty and emotional awareness. It demands the courage to look at your children and see who they really are, not who you need them to be to impress your peers. Stella's parents fundamentally failed this test. By favoring Charlotte, shielding her from reality, feeding her entitlement, and validating her superficiality, they did not love her. They crippled her. They constructed a padded cell of delusion around her, mistaking indulgence for affection. When parents prioritize a pristine facade over the messy, necessary work of building character, they set their children on a collision course with a real world that does not care about their pedigree. Conversely, the weaponization of familial duty against Stella highlights a toxic distortion of traditional values. We are often taught that family means unconditional support, a safety net that never breaks. But Stella's parents mutated this beautiful concept into a form of financial and emotional servitude. They expected her to bleed herself dry to fund their artificial lifestyle, cloaking their greed in the sacred language of family obligations. This is where the concept of fairness in raising children is most frequently violated. Fairness is not always about giving children the exact same things. It is about holding them to the same standard of honesty and accountability. By demanding Stella sacrifice her hard-earned reality to subsidize Charlotte's fantasy, her parents shattered the core trust that binds a family together. It teaches the responsible child that their diligence will only ever be rewarded with heavier burdens, while the reckless child learns they will always be rescued from their own consequences. Long-term guidance for children must be anchored in the truth. Children are incredibly perceptive. They absorb the unsaid rules of the household long before they understand the spoken ones. Charlotte learned early on that manipulation was rewarded and that appearances were the only currency that mattered. Stella learned that her worth was strictly tied to her utility and that her peace would only come through emotional detachment. When parents lack emotional awareness, they pass down their unhealed traumas and their profound insecurities as inheritances far more damaging than any debt. They teach their children to survive each other rather than to support one another. The tragedy of this dynamic is that it is incredibly common. Behind the manicured lawns of suburban America and the heavy wooden doors of elite mountain chalets, countless families are playing out quieter versions of this exact same script. Parents exhaust their resources trying to buy the respect of strangers, while simultaneously alienating the children who were desperate for their genuine presence. They trade authentic connection for the fleeting validation of a country club nod. They mistake the pristine curation of an image for the messy, beautiful reality of a functioning home. In doing so, they leave their children emotionally starved, wandering through mansions that feel entirely empty. As we reflect on this, we must ask ourselves what we are truly modeling for the next generation. Are we raising children who know how to navigate the world with integrity and resilience? Or are we raising fragile actors terrified of stepping off the stage? The most vital responsibility of a parent is not to provide a flawless $85,000 honeymoon. It is to equip a child with the emotional fortitude to accept reality, to build a life of genuine substance, and to understand that true prestige comes from character, not a platinum credit card. If this reflection strikes a nerve, if you recognize the quiet, destructive echoes of these dynamics in the stories around you, or perhaps within the hidden branches of your own family tree, I invite you to join our community. Please take a moment to subscribe and follow Morning Revenge. We explore the profound, often painful realities of relationships, uncovering the hidden truths that connect us all. Let us know in the comments how you define true family responsibility. Conventional wisdom has long dictated that blood is thicker than water, an unbreakable covenant that demands our endless loyalty, regardless of the cost. Society tells us that turning our backs on our parents or our siblings is the ultimate moral failure, a betrayal of the sacred traditional family structure. But the ashes of the Aspen Chalet offer a sharply different truth. They whisper that toxicity does not lose its venom simply because it shares your last name. Sometimes the only way to break a generational curse is to refuse to participate in the charade. What if the most profound act of love is not unconditional submission, but the enforcement of an immovable boundary? We are conditioned to believe that maintaining the family unit is the highest virtue. Yet when a family becomes a cartel of emotional extortion, preserving it is not an act of loyalty. It is an act of self-destruction. The true lesson here goes against everything we are taught at the holiday dinner table. You do not owe your life to the people who gave you life, especially if they only intend to spend yours to save their own. Blood does not create a family. It merely creates relatives. A true family is forged in the fires of mutual respect, radical honesty, and unwavering fairness. When those elements are absent, the structure is just an empty house waiting for the wind to blow it down. As you sit across from your own loved ones tonight, listening to the clinking of glasses and the familiar rhythm of conversation, look closely at the faces around you. Ask yourself, are you bound together by the solid gravity of genuine love, or are you just holding on to each other because you are terrified of the fall?